Chapter 411. Late at night on August 7th. In the darkest night before dawn, when everyone was still thinking about what would happen when the Snow Dance Corps entered Eastern Europe, Reki City, the capital of Wulan State, had completely fallen into chaos that had not been seen in decades. A large number of elites of the Jianghu family of South America were stationed here. So the strongest experts of the Snow Dance Corps also appeared here. No one had expected that Jianghu State would act so quickly and without warning. A few hours ago, Eastern Europe was still a stagnant water with only occasional storms. With the arrival of the Snow Dance Corps, the wind had not risen and the clouds had not surged. In the calm without wind and waves, in an instant, the heavy rain was majestic, abrupt, violent, sharp and ruthless. The revenge came so quickly and without warning. The list of high-level members of the Snow Dance Corps was not a secret to the dark forces. So as soon as the Snow Dance Corps appeared in Im, some major forces in Eastern Europe had noticed that the Snow Dance Corps was missing several heavyweights. But Li Tianlan appeared in front of everyone. So no one would think much about it. So when everyone felt that something was wrong but could not tell what was wrong, the Snow Dance Corps' most ruthless revenge against the Jianghu family of South America began directly in Reki City. Li Tianlan was moving. Cool breeze and drifting cloud were moving. The yin and yang phantom was moving. In a military base in the east of Reki City, the Jianghu family of South America was also moving. The Jianghu family of South America had stationed nearly 800 elites in the east, west, south, and north of Reki City, but three sides were attacked tonight. When he received the signal for help from the resort in the west of the city, Xianxia, the person in charge of the east of the city of the Jianghu family of South America, began to gather people for rescue without hesitation. Xianxia was in his 40s. He had no code name and was not famous in the dark world. But as an expert cultivated internally by the Jianghu family of South America, his status in the Jianghu family of South America was not low at all. In terms of blood relationship, he was the cousin of Jiang Qiansong, the patriarch of the Jianghu family. Such a relationship was closer than the relationship between Jiang Qiansong and Jiang Qianyan. He was a real direct descendant. This time, the Jianghu family of South America sent nearly 2,000 elites into Eastern Europe, which could be regarded as the vanguard force to open up the situation in Eastern Europe. If Jiang Qianyan was the well-deserved number one figure in this force, Xianxia was the second in command of this vanguard force. His strength was not strong or weak in the ranks of the half-step invincible realm, but he was absolutely difficult to deal with. His combat capability was not outstanding, but he was a master who was good at defense. This was also the reason why Xianxia still dared to go over to help when he knew that the experts of Jianghu State who raided the west of the city were Cool Breeze, Drifting Cloud, and yin and yang phantom. Naturally, he was no match for the four of them. Even defending himself was difficult. But at this moment, the 200 elites stationed in the military base in the east of the city with him were the most elite 200 people that the Jianghu family of South America had invested in Eastern Europe. With such a lineup, even if they could not win, they could at least delay the four from Jianghu State. Reki City was the base camp of the Rekvia family. The cooperation between Rekvia and the Jianghu family of South America had always been close, so at this time, Reki City was also the base camp of the Jianghu family of South America. The chaotic city was like a net at this time. The Jianghu family of South America stood on the top of the net and could see the whole situation clearly. The two highnesses of Sai City had left. Li Tianlan, the commander of the Snow Dance Corps, was holding up Jiang Qianyan recklessly. Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud. Phantom Yin Yang. Two top assassins whose deterrent power was no less than that of the half-step invincible realm, plus two half-step invincible realm swordmasters of Mount Shu in Jianghu State, were slaughtering other elites of the Jianghu family of South America stationed in Reki City. Everything was crystal clear. Xianxia knew Jiang Qianyan's strength very well. In this year's holy list, Jiang Qianyan ranked 5th. With his strength, if he went all out, it would take him no more than 20 minutes to kill a young man in the invincible realm. The distance between the east and the west of the city was slightly closer than the distance between Jiang Qianyan and the west of the city, about 10 minutes. That was to say, as long as his side stalled the four experts of Jianghu State for half an hour, Jiang Qianyan, who had killed Li Tianlan, would rush to the west of the city. At that time, the four masters of the Snow Dance Corps of Jianghu State would face the invincible power of the Jianghu family of South America. Xianxia sorted out his thoughts. When the elites of the Jianghu family of South America gathered, his smile was a little twisted. The Snow Dance Corps acted decisively and ruthlessly. The revenge came quickly. First, it was Sai City, then the snow dance corps. 2 consecutive slaps in the face, crisp and loud. But it was not over. If the commander of the snow dance corps and the 2 deputy marshals all died here tonight, who would be slapped in the face by all this? He considered all the possible variables and suddenly said, "Come on. Go and get General Creso." Creso was the highest officer of the military base called Flying Bird. He was an old general in his 50s. He was old but firm, and he was a confidant of the Rekvia family. Although Wulon State had a land area second only to snow country in Europe, its military was relatively chaotic, especially the setting of some sensitive departments, which made people feel that it was neither fish nor fowl. The Flying Bird military base was stationed on the outskirts of the capital. Its duties were similar to those of the garrison of Jianghu State, but the duties on the surface were somewhat vague. Anyway, the Flying Bird military base was stationed in the Wulon State. They could be said to be the most elite army in Wulon State. Tonight, if they could join hands with the Fanio base, the strength of the military would be enough to suppress most variables. In the case that the Snow Dance Corps only aimed at the Jiang family of South America, it was difficult for Wulon State to send troops. But General Creso was a confidant of the Rekvia family. In this country where the army headquarters was full of too many inside stories, as long as General Creso nodded, the army of the Flying Bird base could rush into every corner of Reki City in the fastest time. General Creso did not need to be invited at all. However, before Xianxia could leave his line of sight, an old general in a military uniform with grizzled hair walked over with large strides. The Jiang family of South America was directly stationed in the military base of Wulon State, which was enough to show the close relationship between the Jiang family of South America and the Rekvia family. At this time, the Jiang family of South America was attacked, and the Rekvia family naturally had no reason to remain silent. Therefore, for the sake of the 2 million euros that the Rekvia family had just transferred to his account, the old general, who had less than 2 years left in his term, faced Xianxia and went straight to the point. "Mr. Jiang, if the Jiang family needs help, the Flying Bird Corps is willing to provide military support." Military support and firepower support were sometimes 2 different concepts. At least in this case it was a different concept. At the moment when the threat was not big enough to threaten the life and death of his country, no general dared to order artillery to bombard his capital. Even if the general wanted to go crazy, the 2 million euros that Rekvia had just transferred to his account was not enough to support his fantasy. So military support was at most human support. "That's great." Xianxia laughed happily. He had an ordinary appearance, and his eyes were a little small. When he laughed, his eyes almost became a slit, but the looming sharpness came out from his narrowed eyes. He looked at the old general's military uniform and whispered, "It's just your clothes. This is our own country, and our soldiers have the right to wear military uniforms." General Creso's expression was serious and dignified. "At present, a group of thugs has brought a great threat to the security of Reki City. Mr. Schenker of the Rekvia family believes that our army should appear at this time, so as to enhance the confidence of the people." This was undoubtedly a bunch of nonsense that sounded a little interesting, but in fact, it was meaningless. However, Xianxia listened with relish. When the old general's voice fell, he finally couldn't help laughing and even made a military salute of Wulon State. "I admire the bravery of your military. This is something that many governments lack." The elites of the Jiang family of South America had gathered. More than a dozen military trucks rumbled over. In the night, the lights of the trucks were on. The bright lampposts passed through the darkness and illuminated the darkest night before dawn. "It's my duty," General Creso said calmly and then waved his hand. The elites of the Jiang family of South America and the elites of the Flying Bird base began to act at the same time. The swift and vigorous crowd rushed into the trucks one by one. The old general made an inviting gesture. Xianxia shrugged and followed him into the truck at the very front. The general drove in person. The charging march of Wulon State sounded in the bass. In the passionate music, more than a dozen trucks full of combatants roared out of the Flying Bird base in the night. Money was a kind of power. Especially the euro. This power inspired General Creso's infinite pride. In the roar of the engine, he seemed to think of the countless extraordinary years in his military career. His face was solemn and serious. The truck rushed forward under his control. "Turn left." Outside the Flying Bird base was a narrow, flat path with an obvious slope. This kind of road was built outside the military base. Although it was a little inappropriate, It did have extraordinary military significance. More than a dozen trucks swooped down from a high place under the leadership of the old general, getting faster and faster. From a distance, they looked like a group of mad cows rushing down the hillside in the night. The lower the truck went, the steeper the slope became. The lights illuminated the flat road in the distance. In the truck, the general was talking to Xianxia about the heroic deeds in his military career in high spirits. Wulan State had a land area second only to snow country in Europe, but it had been in constant turmoil in history. The financial order was chaotic, and the military and political systems were in disarray. There were some problems that were not fatal but could not be ignored. In a sense, the Rekvia family, which was based in Wulan State, was listed as one of the top 4 wealthy families in Eastern Europe, but it was not a top wealthy family in the whole of Europe, which had something to do with the overall environment of Wulan State. In such a country where even the establishment of the special warfare system was controversial, the power and blame of soldiers, especially senior soldiers, were somewhat vague. Creso was an old general, so he had a lot of achievements to show off. Jianghu listened very respectfully and occasionally echoed a few words, but he had begun to outline the plan after tonight in his mind. The 2 highnesses of Sai City had left. Tonight, although their side was caught off guard by Li Tianlan, after they reacted, there was almost no possibility of failure with their strength. Did this mean that the Jiang family of South America could restart their plan to plot against the Samsara Palace 3 years ago? The current Samsara Palace had shrunk a lot compared with 3 years ago, but Li Tianlan's status was also extraordinary. If they controlled Li Tianlan, not only would Qin Weibai be in the Jiang family's pocket, but the remaining power of the Samsara Palace would also join in. Moreover, they could also take back the murderous weapon, the legend of Qin, which they had lost 3 years ago, and even Blue Sky Underworld. They could also indirectly influence Jianghu State. In the dim car, Jiangxiu's pupils gradually glowed. Creso drove, and Jiangxiu sat. One was recalling the past. The other was looking forward to the future. In a trance, a somewhat thin figure seemed to appear on the path that was about to reach the end. The truck was very tall. The figure was thin and dry, standing in the middle of the road, lonely like a blade of grass. Jiangxiu glanced at it casually and was about to ignore it when he suddenly realized that there was indeed a person standing there. His line of sight suddenly focused. In his sight, it seemed to be an old man with sparse gray hair and a stooped body. It was a very humble posture, but as the truck swooped over, he tilted his head slightly and frowned. An indescribable sharpness and violence came over in an instant and almost filled the entire car for a moment. The truck rolled over. Jiangxiu saw the old man's face. It was a face that was a little weathered but very strange. Jiangxiu frowned and didn't have time to speak. Creak! The harsh sound of brakes rang out in an instant. The path was steep. With the braking ability of the truck, such a brake was simply a disaster. But Creso didn't seem to realize this. He stared at the old man in the middle of the road. His pupils dilated, and his ruddy face, which had been stimulated by the lofty sentiments in his heart, gradually lost its luster, became pale and then deathly pale. The galloping truck barely stopped less than 20 meters away from the old man, and the glaring light shone on the old man's face. But the brakes in the back were too late to react, and one after another crashed into each other. The light trembled in the collision, and a dull loud roar sounded. General Creso's body also began to tremble. #%. And in an asterisk, the general opened his mouth, but only a very vague and unclear syllable came out of his mouth. His expression was extremely complicated, but it eventually turned into pure fear. At this moment, the old general suddenly thought of an Eastern noun. Karma. He felt that he had really received his retribution. Just 5 minutes ago, he was sitting in the truck and talking to Jiangxiu about his great achievements many years ago. In his boasting, he talked about the Arctic Ocean Command in Jianghu State and how he stood his ground against the opinions of the masses when the Arctic Ocean Command planned to station troops in Wulan State. He even went to war with Jianghu State and defeated the Li family, which was at the height of its power at that time. Jiangxiu did not refute this. He knew very well why the Arctic Ocean Command did not set up a garrison base in Wulan State. It was entirely because of the opposition of Snow Country and many European powers, and it had nothing to do with Wulan State. However, Creso was very happy as he spoke. When he was boasting about this, he never thought that he would meet the protagonist who led the army of Jianghu State to march into Wulan State a few minutes later. When the Arctic Ocean Command was established more than 20 years ago, it was the two highnesses of the Li family, who were at the height of their power in Jianghu state, who went to Eastern Europe together. That was the confrontation between the Li family and the major forces and the major European powers. There were wars and games in such confrontations. In the war of that year, in addition to the two highnesses of the Li family, there were also some equally dazzling figures. And the person who appeared in front of him at this time could barely be regarded as one of the protagonists who had established the foundation of the Arctic Ocean Command. He had set out from Im with 600 elites of the Li family in a day and a night. Along the way, he had cut through the borders of 3 countries, repelled the obstruction of several superpowers, crossed a distance of hundreds of kilometers, and directly attacked Wulan state. When countless experts in the fire-flaming realm, the thunder-shocking realm, and even the half-step invincible realm turned into a rain of blood in front of him, the 600 elites were like an unstoppable wildfire that could almost sweep the entire Wulan state. At that time, General Creso was still very young, and so was the person in front of him. After many years, General Creso almost thought that he was hallucinating when he saw him again. His face had already changed a bit. He looked older and more exhausted, and his body was no longer as straight as before. However, as his killing intent rose up, a familiar feeling washed over him, as if everything that had just happened seemed like it had happened yesterday. In front of the vehicle, a person blocked the whole road. The old man frowned and looked at the motorcade in front of him. He didn't feel familiar with everything in front of him, nor did he sigh with emotion. The killing intent kept rising in him, getting stronger and stronger. All of his essence, chi, and spirit seemed to have reached the peak state in an instant. Creso's body trembled violently. Instinctively, he scrambled out of the truck and ran back. The huge volume caused by the thunder-shocking realm expert resounded through the night sky. The order was simple and straightforward. Flying Bird Corps, retreat! Retreat! The shrill voice spread out in the night. In the chaos, the old man seemed to take a step forward. He still did not recognize the old general who was prominent in Wulan state. He did not have any feelings of revisiting this city again. He didn't like it back then. Eastern Europe was too cold. It was so cold that there was no mortal world. When he took a deep breath, it seemed to be the smell of glaciers. Now that he came here again, he didn't like it either, and he was a little uncomfortable. All these years, he had been in the desert. The desert was too hot. Eastern Europe was too cold. Neither of them was a good place. The old man's palm was burning. The orange fire was extremely hot, dispelling the chill. The flame rose, and the color gradually turned blue. Then it turned blazing white again. The color changed again, but the fire never changed. Flying Bird Corps, retreat, retreat! That's Fireman. The old general's hoarse roar reverberated incessantly. Xianxia frowned. He felt that the name Fireman was a little familiar, but he couldn't remember it. But he didn't intend to be merciful to this guy who dared to block his way. He controlled Li Tianlan. The Jiang family of South America had a very brilliant future again. Xianxia was sure to win. At this moment, no matter who stood in front of him, he would crush them. Xianxia's face twisted for a moment, and he jumped directly from the passenger seat to the driver's seat. Countless violent thunderbolts surged around him and rushed out of the car. The air was twisted and pushed forward under the thunderbolts. Boom! Under the huge force, the truck at the front suddenly flew up completely. The huge force drove more than a dozen trucks up. The truck convoy was like a mad cow, condescending and desperate to crush the old man. Fireman? No matter who he was, he had to die. The flames in Fireman's hands changed from pale white to orange again. Countless trucks soared into the sky under the influence of the lightning and smashed down violently. It was as if they had filled the night sky one after another. It was a terrifying sight. The distance between the two sides was 20 meters, and they were almost reached in an instant. 15 meters. Fireman raised his hands. 10 meters. The fire was in Fireman's single hand. 5 meters. The killing intent in Jiangxia's eyes burst out completely. In his sight, the short old man lowered his body again and punched the ground. Boom! Under the deep night, the darkness within hundreds of meters disappeared in an instant. The entire Fanio base shook like never before. The existence of the night had lost its meaning. Fire. Fire was everywhere. The fire filled the ground, filled the air, and rolled into the sky. The immeasurable raging fire rose against the trend like a tsunami, and the flat path was completely lifted up by this punch. The whole road flew up. Sand, stones, trees, everything turned into a raging fire that condensed into substance. The raging fire surged like stormy waves beating the shore. One by one, the trucks that swooped down were completely swept away by the punch, exploded in the air, and turned into fireballs one after another. A large number of corpses burned for a moment in the fire. Under the blazing temperature, all the flesh and bones were burned into ashes. The ashes fluttered in the night, and it was hazy. The trucks disappeared. A large number of elites and troops also disappeared completely. With Fireman as the center, the whole road had completely disappeared. A huge pit with a radius of hundreds of meters and a depth of tens of meters lay between Fireman and the Fanio base, becoming an impassable gap. The fire under the night sky began to fade. The night reappeared in the sky. The fire in the Fanio base was raging, and the burning ashes were sprinkled in the sky. The thick and white gray was like a mist. Fireman stood in front of the fire, looking at the light in front of him with a calm face. Only the fire was burning, and it seemed to never go out. This was a punch that he had been silent for many years. A punch at the peak. A punch that shocked the sky. This chapter and yesterday's chapter were originally one chapter. Put them together, they are not weak. But yesterday I really had a headache and felt uncomfortable, so I published it in 2 chapters. I can't afford to get hurt if I don't save the manuscript. Chapter 4:12. The ethereal but very real sword intent was still surging in the ruins of the manor. In the laughter, Li Tianlan's figure had completely disappeared in front of Jiang Chenyan. Without any sign of exerting force, as if he had just turned around, his figure had lost all traces. Only the sword intent was still condensing in all directions, endlessly growing. Jiang Chenyan's figure abruptly stopped in front of Li Tianlan. His figure stopped, but the surrounding space suddenly began to twist and shatter. The void domain continued to extend. The ruins suddenly quieted down. The ruins disappeared, the smoke disappeared, and in the extreme silence, only the horrible darkness spread silently. But Jiang Chenyan still did not perceive Li Tianlan. He frowned tightly and suddenly thought of a person, or rather, a piece of equipment. 4 Spirits Armor. Azure Dragon of Jianghu State. For many years, the special warfare system of Jianghu State had gone through countless battles and finally created the 4 Spirits Armor, which was famous in the Dark World, for the 4 Spirits Generals of the Terracotta Army. The most important material of the 4 Spirits Armor was cloud silk, which was priceless in the Dark World. The value of cloud silk was not only its warmth in winter and coolness in summer, but also its extraordinary defensive power. It could absorb nearly half of the attack of an ordinary thundershocking realm expert. This meant that most of the attack power of a fire-flaming realm expert would be absorbed by cloud silk, and even a little of the power of an invincible realm expert would be absorbed. A little was very little. But in the battle of the invincible realm, a little of it might determine the ranking of the divine and holy lists, or even life and death. In the Dark World, top inheritance, special physique, and suitable martial arts were all conditions for people to defeat enemies of a higher realm under normal circumstances. Similarly, there was hardware in the Dark World that could improve people's strength. The most famous was the famous 12 murderous weapons in the Dark World. Any murderous weapon could almost have the deterrent power equivalent to that of an invincible realm expert. Below the murderous weapons, treasures like cloud silk were also hardware to improve strength. Li Tianlan had a cloud silk shirt given to him by Samsara Palace. This was no secret. It was also no secret what the function of Azure Dragon Armor of Jianghu State's 4 Spirits Armor was. Azure Dragon General Gong Sun Qi's Azure Dragon Armor was improved by the Dongqing clan, and it used a technical concept that the Dongqing clan was still ahead of the world in terms of military affairs. The most advanced optical camouflage technology. Gong Sun Qi was very strong. As the #1 person under the invincible realm who was recognized by many in the Dark World, he could find his position even in the holy list when he put on the Azure Dragon Armor. He might not win against an invincible realm expert, but he was absolutely invincible. Optical camouflage. As long as there was light, he could disappear into any corner without leaving a trace. This was the technology of the Dongqing clan. The relationship between Li Tianlan and the Dongqing clan was also no secret. The Dongqing clan repaired the damaged cloud silk robe in the shortest time and used their optical camouflage technology. What Li Tianlan was wearing was almost another four spirits armor. A touch of seriousness finally appeared in Jiang Chenyan's angry and cold eyes. Gong Sun Qi was known as the first person under the invincible realm. He was the strongest among all the superiors of the half-step invincible realm. And the top superiors of the half-step invincible realm had the so-called combat capability of the invincible realm. Li Tianlan might be a little worse than Gong Sun Qi, but he himself had the combat capability of the invincible realm. After putting on that damn robe, it was enough for Jiang Chenyan to pay attention to his existence. The void was still slowly spreading around Jiang Chenyan. The void domain of the invincible realm was dark and silent. But the domain of the superiors on the holy list still had light. The light was always there, whether it was light or dark. Where there was light, optical camouflage could disappear in any corner without a sound. The void domain kept spreading. Jiang Chenyan's eyes suddenly turned cold. Suddenly, a gust of wind appeared in the pitch-black and silent void. The gust of wind swept every corner of the void domain, and the cold airflow stirred the silent void. The whole domain suddenly fluctuated like a curtain. Jiang Chenyan perceived everything around him with no expression on his face. His will had been completely condensed to the peak, so the gust of wind in the void was getting stronger and stronger, and it had become a storm that almost rushed out of the domain. The domain of hundreds of meters became more and more manic under his control. In the constantly undulating darkness, Jiang Chenyan finally noticed a blurry, almost unnoticeable white shadow in front of him. The light flowed subtly on the white shadow. The clothes of concealment. An illusory person. Die! Jiang Chenyan stepped down and swung his fist straight up. Boom! A horrible sound suddenly exploded in the dark domain. The domain shrank wildly, and the void of 100 meters was condensed into a fist by Jiang Chenyan. The horrible killing intent rose into the sky. Jiang Chenyan's body rushed forward, and in the fist condensed with darkness, like a goshawk seeing its prey, he swooped down with all his strength. The wildly shrinking domain became darker. They all created domains with their bodies and swallowed the sword intent with their domains. The other was like the Wang family of Beihai, the Li family, the Jifeng sword training school, and the purgatory of heaven capital. They followed the path of turning oneself into a sword and breaking the domain. Simply put, the former pursued a great ability to contain and control. The latter, on the other hand, pursued absolute destructive power. Jiang Chenyan was very confident in his invincible domain. But when his domain failed to restrain Li Tianlan well, he recognized the fact. He underestimated the young man after all. The sword energy all over the sky fell like a rainstorm. The rotating giant sword had reached Jiang Chenyan's head. Feeling the almost suffocating coldness, Jiang Chenyan's eyes were cold. The white shadow was still maintaining the sword intent around him. Li Tianlan's figure flickered and returned to the darkness again. Jiang Chenyan's expression changed. Without hesitation, he suddenly raised his palm and punched the void. This was his domain. It was his void. It was made by him and could also be destroyed by him. The whole dark space suddenly paused in silence for a moment. The vast and distant darkness was completely torn apart in an instant. The domain that covered hundreds of meters of space exploded completely. Darkness and sword energy broke out at the same time. The two forces were entangled and colliding. In the ruins that restored the night, the sword intent and darkness intertwined, and light emerged. Two streaks of blood appeared in the chaotic ruins. Jiang Chenyan fell from mid-air and stood on the ground. He bent down subconsciously and swallowed the blood gushing from his throat. In the corner of his eyes, Li Tianlan's white clothes had been completely stained with blood. His figure fell to the ground, staggered back, and then disappeared into the night again. Anger, coldness, resentment, and jealousy. All the negative emotions disappeared completely in Jiang Chenyan's eyes. His eyes were black and white. In his clear and indifferent eyes, there was only killing intent shining in his pupils. The most naked killing intent. Covered in blood, he punched again. It was still a clear and powerful fist. His movements were firm and steady. After realizing Li Tianlan's strength, Jiang Chenyan no longer held back. This was his first battle since he entered Eastern Europe. His opponent was a junior. It was disgraceful, but as long as he could kill him, everything was absolutely worth it. His body leaned forward slightly with the outstretched fist. Their tightly clasped arms splattered sparkling blood in the night. Jiang Chenyan's eyes were full of killing intent. Under the killing intent, there was concentration. The punch seemed slow. But it couldn't be stopped. The punch went forward. However, the entire space was swept back along with his punch. In all directions, east, west, north, and south. All the surrounding space seemed to be completely imprisoned by the punch, and moved closer to him. The space was not in the dark. Instead, it became a blur of color. Only the fist seemed to be slowly enlarging in the shrinking space in a trance, as if filling the whole world. The most powerful unique technique of the Jianghu family of South America. 30-meter mortal world. The evaluation of this unique technique in the dark world might not be as good as that of the 10th unique domain. But its talent was no less than that of any unique technique. In the dark world, when all the domains of the invincible realm focused on expansion, only the 30-meter mortal world pursued shrinking. It shrank smaller and smaller. Jiang Qiansong, the patriarch of the Jianghu family of South America, performed the 30-meter mortal world. Although the domain around him was not really 30 meters, it was infinitely close. In the domain of 30 meters, Jiang Qiansong came and went with power comparable to that of a god. Jiang Chenyan couldn't do this, but he could barely shrink the domain to about 60 meters. In the domain of 60 meters, a full blow of the invincible realm was enough to destroy everything. This was the true meaning of the 30-meter mortal world. When the domain shrank, the force of a full blow would be greater. A huge force gathered in all directions. Jiang Chenyan's fist was still stretching forward. In a misty luster, Li Tianlan's figure appeared most clearly in the 30-meter mortal world. The domain kept shrinking. 150 meters. 100 meters. 80 meters. In his sight, Jiang Chenyan's fist seemed to become very big. But it was all an illusion because of the huge power of the punch. Li Tianlan's figure gradually became difficult. Under this punch, his figure was limited, and he couldn't get away at all. Li Tianlan didn't want to go, either. The domain of the 30-meter mortal world forcibly controlled his body and seemed to collide with Jiang Chenyan's fist. Li Tianlan looked up. His eyes shone brightly. He raised the blade of falling stars in his hand. In the overwhelming pressure, a clear whistle that could pierce through gold and crack stones sounded in the misty domain. The pressure from all sides pressed on. Li Tianlan didn't retreat half a step. He raised the sword. Charge! No words could describe Li Tianlan's decisiveness at this moment. The silver blade rose with his body. The sword intent all over the sky was released and crushed by the domain of the 30-meter mortal world. But he still held the sword. The sword intent disappeared. But his whole person had become one with the falling stars, shining with sharper and sharper light. His figure rushed into the air and rushed to Jiang Qiansong. A sword stabbed straight. This sword was not the most suitable for him, but it was not a perfect martial art. It belonged to the Li family. It belonged to the 24 moves of sword. 21st blade, shatter of land. The Li family's sword shattered the domain with sword energy. The shatter of land was the most aggressive sword move against the domain of the invincible realm. It went forward with indomitable will. The domain was still shrinking. 50 meters. The distance of 50 meters was extremely short. The white clothes and the silver sword seemed to be burning in the domain, triggering thunder. But in the end, the sword was still the sword. With a silver light, the sword blade slammed into Jiang Chenyan. Jiang Chenyan held out his hand. The domain compressed wildly in front of him. A mass of air appeared in his hand. Falling stars stabbed the mass of air directly. Boom! The whole domain shook. Jiang Chenyan's face suddenly turned pale. Blood burst out of Li Tianlan's body. The mass of air that was condensed to the extreme dissipated wildly. Falling stars in Li Tianlan's hand gradually trembled, and the straight blade gradually bent. Jiang Chenyan's eyes flashed with coldness. Li Tianlan's eyes were still as bright as stars. In the process of falling stars bending, he suddenly laughed. The Li family practiced swordsmanship, which was known to the world. But it seemed that it had been too many years, so long that everyone had forgotten, or rather, neglected some things. The Li family originated from Xuanyuantai. Xuanyuantai originated from the Lin clan. The Lin clan originated from the ancestors of the Lin clan. But when the amazing ancestor created the 24 moves of sword, he used a set of punching techniques. Even if many people in the Li family had never practiced that set of punching techniques, Neither did the Lin clan. That set of punching techniques was very powerful. But many of the most powerful unique skills were recorded in the Invincible Manual. For hundreds of years, except for that ancestor, Li Tianlan seemed to be the only one who had practiced the Invincible Manual. Falling stars bent to the limit, disappeared in an instant, and became the silver bracelet on Li Tianlan's wrist again. Li Tianlan was in the air. The misty darkness shrouded the domain of the night. His bones vibrated wildly, and the sound was like a dragon's roar. The dragon's roar suddenly sounded, accompanied by raging fire and thunder, going straight into the sky. This was the predecessor of the 24 moves of sword. The 72 styles of Dragon Fist of the Lin clan and the Li family. Dragon Fist, flying dragon in the sky. Raging fire and thunder expanded wildly in the domain, raging everything. In this late night, in the misty domain. Reki City, Eastern Europe. The Li family, which had been silent for more than 20 years, seemed to shine again. The light burned on this young man, who was only 22 years old, and turned into a flame that seemed to never go out. Chapter 413. No matter what it was, anything that could exist for a long time and be passed down was definitely a classic. It was the same for martial arts. The most classic, the most basic, the simplest, and also the strongest. Hundreds of years ago, before the Li family existed, the founder of Zhuanyuantai in Jianghu state was the ancestor of the Lin clan who could compete with the Chosen One. And what laid the foundation for Zhuanyuantai was the 72 styles of Dragon Fist. Majestic, exquisite, strange, swift, fierce, feminine, all-encompassing. The ancestor of the Lin clan spent most of his life simplifying the 72 styles of Dragon Fist into 24 moves of sword. It was the 24 moves of sword that had been circulating for hundreds of years and made the Lin clan and the Li family look down on the dark world for hundreds of years. Before the 24 moves of sword reached the advanced level, the unparalleled kung fu of that ancestor was able to compete with the heavenly suns was the Dragon Fist. The Lin clan lived in seclusion. The Li family was silent. For a long time, the glory of Zhuanyuantai had been dim for many years. The brilliance of the Invincible Manual in the record of war god of Zhuanyuantai would be completely extinguished. The dark world without the Li family was lonely. But after the loneliness, one would eventually forget. That night. A very ordinary time. A very ordinary place. Just when everyone was about to forget the sharpness of the Battle God Catalog, accompanied by lightning and flames, the strongest martial path in the Battle God Catalog, the most ancient ultimate art, suddenly erupted with the most resplendent light. Dragon Fist, soaring dragon. In the domain of the 30-meter mortal world, Li Tianlan's body suddenly stretched out. Every bone and muscle in his body was madly vibrating the dual wind and thunder veins in his body. Thunderbolts and flames spread all over the domain with his body as the center. The raging fire kept burning, and the extremely dazzling blue thunderbolts raged in every corner of the domain. It was still inconvenient for Li Tianlan to move. But under the crazy vibration of the dual thunder veins, Li Tianlan's every move carried extreme strength and speed. The sword intent of the Shatter of Land had not dissipated, and the remaining sword intent was trying to support the domain. After the domain shrank, it began to expand toward the surroundings, covering a larger and larger area, while the air mass condensed on Jiang Qianyan's fist was getting smaller and smaller. Li Tianlan strode forward. The air mass in front of Jiang Qianyan swirled wildly, desperately suppressing Li Tianlan. The silent domain began to rumble. The void, which had comprehended the power of resistance, began to condense and become heavy. All the heaviness was pressed on Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan kept moving forward. The space in the domain turned into a hurricane that blew in the opposite direction. The hurricane grew stronger and stronger. Li Tianlan moved forward against the wind. His movements became slower and slower, and the pressure on his body increased. Even his movements began to change. But his footsteps didn't stop at all. He carried the mountains, the sea, and the whole world on his back. The cloud silk robe fluttered backward, and the robe behind him fluttered in a cold arc. Blood gushed out of Li Tianlan's body. The light on his body grew brighter and brighter. All the lightning was gathering towards him. In Jiang Qianyan's sight, Li Tianlan's figure spilled blood. Before the blood fell, his figure had completely disappeared. In front of him was a ball of light wrapped in lightning. The arcs of light were pulled out by the hurricane of the domain, forming patches after patches of light. However, He did not stop moving forward with great difficulty. The two of them were very close. Jiang Chenyan, with solemn and serious eyes, took a deep breath and shook his arms. In his hands, the majestic air mass rotated and turned into a huge vortex in the blink of an eye. Jiang Chenyan pushed the huge vortex forward one step. Li Tianlan's figure became clear without warning. The distance between the two had been reduced to less than 3 meters. At this distance, Jiang Chenyan could clearly see the wounds all over Li Tianlan's body. He could also see that the wounds on his body were constantly tearing and healing. Jiang Chenyan's pupils shrank sharply. In his sight, Li Tianlan's body was extremely clear. But he was missing an arm. His right hand was full of light. The purest, most dazzling, and most violent light. It seemed that endless light gathered in his right hand, vast and majestic. In a trance, Jiang Chenyan only felt that the other party seemed to be holding a surging ocean in his hand. Li Tianlan raised his arm. In Jiang Chenyan's domain, his movement seemed slow, but he couldn't be stopped at all. The vortex in front of Jiang Chenyan pushed him toward Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan didn't dodge at all. His right hand smashed down. With a punch condensed with light, he smashed into the very center of the vortex. Crack! It seemed to be an extremely grand and absolutely light sound. It sounded like something was breaking. Everyone's eardrums hurt fiercely. Domain. Thunder. Flame. Hurricane. Even Li Tianlan and Jiang Chenyan's bodies stopped abruptly. Outside the domain, both the remaining elites of the Jiang family of South America and the elites of the Wuxia family were desperately fleeing. The figures of Jiang Chenyan and Li Tianlan appeared in the night. That domain swallowed the night, almost solidifying. Everything in the domain seemed to be still. Li Tianlan's punch condensed with thunder passed through the center of the terrible vortex. The whole vortex turned blue in stillness. Li Tianlan's arm rushed in and collided with Jiang Chenyan's fist. The vortex was huge. So it looked like Li Tianlan's whole body rushed into the vortex. Crack, crack, crack. In the strange stillness, centered on the domain, countless subtle sounds began to appear in all directions. The elites of the Jiang family of South America and Wuxia fled desperately. Cracks began to appear on the ground of ruins and corpses. The cracks spread in all directions, and in the blink of an eye, they turned into bottomless ravines. The bright but misty domain of silence lit up for a moment. The whole domain fluctuated like water. In the domain, Li Tianlan moved. The strange stillness suddenly turned into an absolute explosion. His whole body rushed directly into the vortex caused by Jiang Chenyan's all-out blow. The blue thunder and blood dyed the whole domain. Boom! In the loud noise that went straight into the sky, the whole vortex collapsed completely under Li Tianlan's impact. 30-meter mortal world, known as the strongest unique skill of the Jiang family of South America, began to break. The most thorough explosion. Countless misty lights flew in disorder. In the earth-shattering noise, the domain was completely broken, and the huge force rushed out of the domain completely out of control. The huge force raged in the sky and on the ground. Within hundreds of meters, the thick and hard earth was completely lifted up, and the deep surface turned into smoke and dust in the thunder and flames. As the burst domain blew into the distance, the ground of the whole manor kept crumbling and collapsing, or directly rushing into the sky. Li Tianlan was close to Jiang Chenyan. The ground was collapsing and sinking. Ruins and boulders rushed into the sky and smashed down. The sky was full of thunder and flames. In a scene like the end of the world, Li Tianlan was attacking desperately. Flying Dragon was in the sky. Until the moment the domain broke, the dragon fist led by the huge force really went straight into the sky. The night was not dark. There was dazzling light everywhere. Thunder and fire kept gathering behind Li Tianlan. In the collapse of the earth, a high wall made entirely of thunder and fire seemed to form behind Li Tianlan. The high wall was hundreds of meters high, with an amazing momentum that towered into the clouds. The light of thunder and fire intertwined, spread, and rose on the wall, turning into a vision that could be seen by most of the city. The speed and power of the dual wind and thunder veins had been exerted to the limit. The dragon's roar spread far away. Thunder and fire surged behind him, and as he waved his fist, they instantly turned into countless dragon-shaped beams of light. From a distance, on the high wall made entirely of thunder and fire, dragon-shaped beams of light shot out from behind Li Tianlan and desperately pounced on Jiang Chenyan. In the light, Li Tianlan's broken white clothes loomed in the raging fire, illusory. He was unarmed, but when he waved his hands, there must be dragon-shaped beams of light around him. The majestic power turned into giant dragons intertwined with thunder and fire. The high wall was still blazing, and the dragons flew around Li Tianlan, turning into a gorgeous and majestic picture. Jiang Qianyan had no idea that Li Tianlan's counterattack would be so violent. He was not familiar with the dragon fist. But at this moment, among the countless dragon-shaped phantoms, he finally saw the once familiar Li family. The dragons of thunder and fire rushed over and were constantly smashed by Jiang Qianyan. Li Tianlan moved forward. Attack, attack, attack. Without any defense, he ignored any injuries. All the fighting intent poured out in the most incisive way in the brandishing of the dragon fist, turning into an instinctive desire to attack and kill. The power kept bursting under the night sky. All of Jiang Qianyan's counterattacks fell on Li Tianlan, but they couldn't make him retreat. His strength was indeed not as good as Jiang Qianyan's. But the dual wind and thunder veins, the long-lost dragon fist, the absolutely focused will, and the optical camouflage on the cloud silk robe allowed him to seize the initiative at the cost of serious injury at the moment when the domain was broken. Now all he needed to do was to attack. In everyone's sight, the earth had collapsed and disappeared, and countless boulders melted in the high wall of thunder and fire as soon as they rushed into the sky. The high wall was moving forward. Li Tianlan was moving forward. Jiang Qianyan was retreating. Countless dragon-shaped thunder and fire rushed out of the high wall in the dragon's roar, surrounded Li Tianlan, and pounced on Jiang Qianyan. The huge force distorted the air. In the crazy attack, Jiang Qianyan was completely crushed by Li Tianlan and suffered the opponent's merits in a sorry state. With the battlefield of the two as the center, the whole manor had collapsed and disappeared. Water rose from the ground and quickly gathered. The former manor had been beaten into a lake tens of meters deep. As the two passed, waves of water surged into the sky and turned into an ice wall in front of Li Tianlan. An invisible and immaterial storm surged in front of Jiang Qianyan. Li Tianlan didn't care about anything. He didn't even look at anything. He only attacked. The ice wall, the storm, the rising boulders, the condensed thunder, and everything. Li Tianlan chased all the way, and any obstacle in front of him was smashed and torn. The whole night was trembling in such a violent attack. This was the momentum of a warrior. It was the momentum of the peak, crazy and insufferably arrogant. No retreat until death. Dragon fist. Heaven falls and earth rends. Li Tianlan's fists, like heavy hammers, hit Jiang Qianyan's arms hard. The moment the violent momentum rose into the sky, the high wall behind Li Tianlan, which was almost a kilometer high and disappeared into the end of the night, shook. The dragon's roar grew louder. It was even a little tragic. The high wall of fire suddenly collapsed with Li Tianlan's fists. Countless rays of light fell fiercely, like a long river falling from the sky or the Great Wall falling from the sky, almost overturning the whole world. It was earth-shattering. This was truly earth-shattering. The nearly 1,000-meter-high wall burned the night sky and slammed into the lake below, like a mountain crashing into the pond. The water of the whole lake rushed up but was instantly burned out in the raging fire. The deep pit still existed, but the water instantly disappeared in the falling thunder and fire. The lake turned into a desert in the blink of an eye. Only the dragon-shaped light was still flying around Li Tianlan, desperately chasing after Jiang Qianyan. The light in his eyes grew brighter and brighter. Fire and thunder fell completely from the sky. The dazzling light dimmed for a moment. Li Tianlan suddenly took a small step forward. In the twinkling of an eye, countless shadows appeared under the light all over the sky. Catalogue of God of War, Night Walking. Night Walking did not reach Jiang Qianyan's back, but it was close to Jiang Qianyan's body in an instant. This was the closest the two had ever been to each other. Less than a meter away. Li Tianlan's figure suddenly leaped into the air. His body tightened, his bones and muscles contracted at the same time, and his dual thunder veins were fully extended. The dragon's roar in the night sky was unprecedentedly louder, shaking the sky. Li Tianlan stood in the air, connecting heaven and earth. There was no light in his eyes, no anger, no killing intent. There was only tranquility and deathly stillness left in them. In a trance, a nearly transparent light lit up around Li Tianlan. The light suddenly straightened around him and spread to the sky and the earth. The light connected heaven and earth. Wherever it passed, all the thunder and fire were instantly absorbed by the light. Li Tianlan reached out and clenched his fist, seeming to hold the whole transparent light. Jiang Qianyan suddenly looked up. An unconcealable look of horror appeared in his eyes. Soundlessly, the ray of light descended. Jiang Qianyan seemed to be completely locked up, and there was nowhere to escape. Li Tianlan held the light in his palm and suddenly fell in mid-air. The light was not in the shape of a dragon, but the overwhelming dragon's roar came to him. Li Tianlan's momentum suddenly rose to the limit. This was the last move of the Dragon Fist. The Fatal Punch. Dragon Fist. Remove armor at the sight of the dragon. In a trance, Li Tianlan's thoughts went back to Mount Qingyun more than 3 years ago. At that time, Mount Qingyun was still open to the public. At that time, Mount Qingyun was still regarded as a fairyland by outsiders. In the somewhat unfamiliar sight, he saw the white mist shrouding Qingyun Temple on Qingyun Hill, and similarly saw the old monk in the white mist. He saw the old monk's body slowly dissipating. As he muttered softly, the old monk said something that was exactly the same as his current ultimate technique. The dragon will look up, remove armor at the sight of the dragon. Boom! Late at night in Eastern Europe, Li Tianlan's body fell in mid-air. The misty white mist instantly rose around him, enveloping the night. Li Tianlan's body became more stretched in an instant. The dual wind and thunder veins reached the perfect state the moment the white mist appeared. His willpower also reached the perfect state. His fighting intent rose to the peak. His strength, speed, willpower, sword intent, and fist intent were completely sublimated. At this moment, Li Tianlan was unprecedentedly powerful. He was even more powerful than when he entered the invincible realm in East Island. This was the real strength of the divine list. It was a punch close to the peak of the invincible realm. Li Tianlan waved his fist. His arm smashed down directly. Puff! The change came suddenly. When he was at his most powerful. In his power. When his speed, willpower, and sword intent were fully integrated, an inexplicable pain spread through his body in an instant. Li Tianlan's momentum fell from the peak to the bottom in an instant. Nothing unexpected happened. But this punch close to the peak of the invincible realm was restricted by his perfect body in all aspects. That kind of power existed in his body, but it couldn't be condensed. Instead, it flew wildly. He couldn't throw this punch. Instead, at the peak, he was seriously injured because of the restriction of his body. A mouthful of blood spurted directly from Li Tianlan's mouth. It was extremely scarlet. Spoiler ahead of time? Some brothers said that Jiang Qianyan would not die. If Jiang Qianyan does not die, what's the point of writing so many chapters? Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heaven Divine Emperor Mobile Version. Chapter 4:14. No words could describe how he felt at this moment. The moment of peak, the most perfect state, the strongest attack. At the moment when his killing intent was at its strongest, he completely lost control. A sense of extreme emptiness and loneliness filled his whole body, but the powerful feeling that he could tear the world apart at will still existed. The extreme emptiness and absolute power seemed to be an illusion. Acting on Li Tianlan, all he could feel was a crazy depression. Li Tianlan's eyes turned blood red in an instant. He could clearly feel the power of this punch. See the dragon take off his armor. This was the most comprehensive condensation of a martial artist's physical qualities. His willpower was comparable to the heavenly king heart, and his dual wind and thunder veins, which were far beyond the ordinary wind and thunder veins. The martial arts he had been cultivating in his life, and the martial arts he had been exploring, were all completely integrated. This punch was almost infinitely close to the power of the peak of the invincible realm, and he would also enter the invincible realm. As long as his realm was stabilized, he would be an expert at the peak of the invincible realm who could reach the top 3 on the divine list. When he was suppressed by the Wang family of Beihai and forced to Eastern Europe by Wang Tianzong, if Li Tianlan entered the invincible realm tonight and stabilized his realm, even if he faced Wang Tianzong, he could retreat unscathed. Everything seemed incomparably clear. Li Tianlan was only one punch away from the peak of the invincible realm. What a wonderful illusion! But this punch contained all of Li Tianlan's martial arts. The distance of one punch was also the distance of the entire Great Tao. It was so close, yet it felt like the end of the world. It was not until this moment that Li Tianlan truly understood that there was nothing wrong with his willpower, and that he did not need to sleep all day to nourish his spirit. Traveling tens of thousands of miles for 3 years had not only exhausted him, but it had also tempered his perfect state of mind. His strength, his speed, and his willpower had all become incomparably perfect along with the formation of his martial arts. However, his progress in martial arts was a little slow. Before the invincible realm, there was no realm in his martial arts in the traditional sense. But if he didn't enter the invincible realm, he would still make slow progress. Slow progress, low level of martial arts, problems that were originally not a problem became the most serious problem. There were no flaws in his martial arts. But before the invincible realm, martial arts that had no shortcomings became the biggest shortcoming. If he could break through the invincible realm, none of the current problems would be a problem. But standing on the threshold of the invincible realm, he was perfect in any field, but all kinds of perfection couldn't be integrated at all. He couldn't keep up with the speed of gathering power. When he increased his speed, his strength began to decrease. When his strength and speed were perfect, his willpower couldn't support it. So he raised his fist. When his strength, speed, and willpower reached their peak, he could not throw a punch at all. The so-called perfection did not condense at all. Instead, it began to spread to different parts of his body, to his arms, to his legs. It spread without limit. If he couldn't condense it, how could he talk about the great Tao? In such a situation, even Li Tianlan, with his state of mind, was stunned for a moment. The question was simple. As long as he could enter the invincible realm, when his body was tough enough to withstand all his perfections, these problems would not be a problem. But the biggest problem was that he couldn't condense his perfect strength, speed, and willpower together. How could he break through the invincible realm? There seemed to be a fault in his path. It was also like a dead knot. His body fell to the ground. The transparent light between heaven and earth, which had absorbed countless thunderbolts, was completely shattered in his hands. Jiang Chenyan, who should have had the fastest reaction speed between life and death, couldn't help but be stunned. Li Tianlan's feet stepped on the ground. The crazy blood red in his eyes disappeared in an instant, and he became calm again. At the moment when the offensive completely collapsed, he raised his hand again. Boom! From a flat land to a lake, from a lake to a desert, the whole manor ruins shook. The dissipated thunderbolts burst out in the most crazy way in an instant. Li Tianlan punched forward. His whole body seemed to be carried up by this punch, and with an unparalleled impact, he rushed to Jiang Chenyan. The distance between the two was extremely close. In just a few meters of space, Li Tianlan's figure suddenly burst out a large number of residual shadows. His whole body, like a cannonball, hit Jiang Chenyan hard. Dragon Fist. Azure Dragon Cannon. This was the first punch of the 72 styles of Dragon Fist. The beginning of martial arts. It was also the most impactful punch of Dragon Fist. There was no time to dodge or think. At such a close distance, the punch condensed with majestic power hit Jiang Chenyan's chest. The punch hit the flesh. Li Tianlan was still rushing forward. His arm, under the natural bend, drove the thunderbolts all over the sky, and turned into an elbow strike that hit the same place. Li Tianlan's whole body came up and hit Jiang Chenyan hard. The power of the two sides collided completely. Wind and thunder exploded all over the sky. The flame rose into the sky and turned into a pillar of fire shooting straight into the sky. Countless storms mixed with thunder and lightning turned into a faint blue halo. The halo spread in all directions with Li Tianlan and Jiang Chenyan as the center. Along the way, the silent power of destruction followed the halo like a shadow. Everywhere the halo went, there was a land of death. Li Tianlan's figure stayed where it was. Jiang Chenyan's body was completely knocked into the air by the Azure Dragon Cannon. The sound of bones breaking was extremely faint in the sound of the thunderbolts exploding. Thick blood flowed down Jiang Chenyan's mouth, and his powerful aura began to fluctuate violently, extremely obscure and crazy. Thunderbolts and fire intertwined in the night, and the battlefield was distorted. Through the distorted space, Li Tianlan glanced at Jiang Chenyan and turned away. His figure flickered in the fire. The already somewhat broken white clothes glowed. In the blink of an eye, there was only a vague figure left in the fire. Stay! Jiang Chenyan's furious voice swept through the night sky in an instant. The invincible realm expert, who had just been suppressed by Li Tianlan, was furious for a moment. He was 5th on the Holy List this year. The Holy List was different from the Divine List. At the top of the Divine List, every rank was absolutely authoritative. The latter half of the Divine List and the entire Holy List would always fluctuate obscurely. Wang Tianzong had been number 1 on the Divine List for several years and was invincible. No one would doubt it. But the number 1 on the Holy List did not have much dominance in the invincible realm. The overall strength of the number 1 on the Holy List was not as good as that of the number 15 on the Divine List. Such a list might be authoritative at the beginning, but as time passed, every invincible realm expert would make progress. The gap between the top 5 on the Holy List was actually very small. Jiang Chenyan was 5th on the Holy List a few years ago. In the past few years, although it was difficult for him to break through the level of martial arts, his own accumulation was getting richer and more subtle in the use of power. In the next ranking of the Divine and Holy Lists, he even had a chance to hit the Divine List. But in tonight's battle, under the circumstances that he had lost the initiative, he was actually suppressed by a young man who wasn't even 30 years old. He was simply like a dog. All the injuries were suppressed by Jiang Chenyan in an instant. The entire night sky suddenly became extremely distorted. The domain spread wildly. 30-meter mortal world. 3 inches human world. The strongest domain of the Jiang family of South America would naturally have different changes. Heaven and earth began to collapse and shrink. The mortal world was only 9 meters long. Jiang Chenyan took a sudden step, as if crossing the whole world with one step. This was the extreme speed of the invincible realm expert with all his strength. In the blink of an eye, in a whistling hurricane, Jiang Chenyan's figure came directly to Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan's figure had not disappeared. The crazy killing intent rushed to Li Tianlan from the front and the back at the same time. Lightning surged like a waterfall in the domain of the 30-meter mortal world. The lightning and the domain merged with each other. Xianxia, the patriarch of the Wuxia family, had one less bodyguard. A tall European man with a cold aura left Xianxia's side, turned to the battlefield, and attacked with all his strength. As one of the 4 major families in Eastern Europe, the Wuxia family did not have an invincible realm expert. But in Eastern Europe before the turmoil, the Wuxia family, the Violet family, the Morton family, and the Qin family were the pillars that supported the entire Polar Ground Alliance in Eastern Europe. The previous structure of the Polar Ground Alliance was extremely complicated. The 4 supreme families in Eastern Europe, the governments of Eastern Europe, and countless wealthy families in Eastern Europe united to form the Polar Ground Alliance, the world's largest and bloated super dark force. But at any time, the 4 pillars of the Polar Ground Alliance had an absolutely transcendent position. So although the Wuxia family did not have an invincible realm expert, they never lacked thundershocking realm experts or even half-step invincible realm experts to serve the Wuxia family. Huang Xue, you go too. Kill him together with Henry. Xianxia stared at Li Tianlan, who had been completely trapped in the domain on the battlefield, and his voice was cold and decisive. First, the 2 highnesses of Sai City attacked his manor. Then came the revenge of the Snowdance Corps. Everyone in Jianghu state seemed to be unscrupulously retaliating against the Jiang family of South America overnight. But this was the motherfucking Reki city. The war started here, and it was to trample on the dignity of the Wuxia family. It was impossible for Xianxia to stay out of it. Anyone who provoked Wuxia should be prepared for Wuxia's counterattack. Huang Xue. Henry. Before the collapse of the Polar Ground Alliance, both of them were members of the Alliance Parliament. Although the Polar Ground Alliance still existed in name, it was in chaos and could no longer function. The 2 half-step invincible realm experts also returned to the Wuxia family at the same time and worked for Xianxia. The 2 had cooperated in the Polar Ground Alliance for many years and had a tacit understanding. So when Henry helped Jiang Chenyan, Xianxia did not hesitate to send Huang Xue over. The figure beside Xianxia moved slightly. The whole battlefield appeared again in an instant. A bolt of ice-cold lightning flashed. 2 thunderbolts spread in the night and eventually merged into the domain of the 30-meter mortal world. The whole domain was no longer the initial misty color. The entire domain was filled with a dark blue color that was filled with the aura of destruction. Li Tianlan's figure became clearer in the dim blue domain. Jiang Chenyan's expression was ferocious and cold, and eventually turned into a completely cold killing intent. In the 30-meter mortal world. In the 30-meter mortal world. Jiang Chenyan punched down with a loud bang. The whole domain twisted like never before. Thunderbolts flew and intertwined in the twisted space. The dim blue light curtain kept expanding and began to explode with a strong aura of destruction. It was not an outbreak. It was a collapse. The shattered domain shrank to a point. Li Tianlan's figure was directly swallowed by the destructive power, completely torn apart, and disappeared in an instant. Jiang Chenyan's face suddenly darkened. He saw Li Tianlan's body break into countless pieces. But there was no blood. It was just a shadow that they were trapped in the domain. Shadow again. Shadow. Shadow. Jiang Chenyan felt a headache and irritation for no reason. After the domain broke, there was silence. A biting cold wind blew through the air. Jiang Chenyan suddenly looked back. In his sight, in the position where he and Li Tianlan had just fought, Li Tianlan's figure emerged silently and went away in a flash. The Jiang family of South America is just as a second brother. It should be too late for you to save your dog now, but I don't think there will be many left. Li Tianlan's figure was getting farther and farther away. Under the night, only his wild laughter kept ringing. Jiang Chenyan suddenly reacted. He subconsciously wanted to find his cell phone, but found that it had been completely destroyed in the battle. The strongest combat force of the Snowdance Corps came to contain him. The other experts went to slaughter the elites of the Jiang family of South America in Reki City. Was that the other party's plan? Jiang Chenyan only felt that the plan was really stupid. The 800 elites of the Jiang family of South America stationed in Reki City were important. But how could they be more important than Li Tianlan? Li Tianlan did contain Jiang Chenyan. But did he really think he could leave at will? Jiang Chenyan grinned and no longer cared about the 800 elites. Without hesitation, he jumped up and chased Li Tianlan. At the same time, when the night was about to pass, there was a glimmer of light in the sky. In the camp of the Jianghu State garrison, the officers of the Snowdance Corps who came to Eastern Europe from Jianghu State had rested, and the camp was quiet. Lieutenant General Cheng Huaining, commander of the Arctic Ocean Command, walked in the camp and found Li Zhonghu directly. Both of them were from the Border Control Corps. Although there was a level difference, they were absolutely acquaintances. Cheng Huaining knocked on Li Zhonghu's door. The light was on in Li Zhonghu's room. Under the light, the Major General of the Snowdance Corps was already in a military uniform, full of murderous intent. It doesn't seem to be time yet. Cheng Huaining glanced at Li Zhonghu and frowned. Let's march at dawn. It's about time. Li Zhonghu said calmly, His Highness's plan leaves us a lot of free time. In order to prevent accidents and contingencies, it's just right to start now. Start? Where to? A voice rang out abruptly. Chen Qingwan, the Vice Marshal of the Snowdance Corps, rushed in and asked regardless. He had just discovered that the elites of the Snowdance Corps were mobilizing. And they were all elites from the Border Control Corps. Chen Qingwan's task was to keep an eye on Li Tianlan. Now that Li Tianlan was not there, Chen Qingwan naturally had to keep an eye on Li Tianlan's direct subordinates. A trace of disgust flashed in Cheng Huaining's and Li Zhonghu's eyes at the same time. They could understand Chen Qingwan's duty. But the other party's complete disregard for face was really disgusting. Go to Reki City. His Highness's order. Li Zhonghu said flatly. Where is the order? Chen Qingwan narrowed his eyes slightly. Password. Li Zhonghu said calmly. I can't get in touch with His Highness now. Chen Qingwan shook his head and said, So I can't be sure of this order. General Li, I don't agree with your transfer of troops this time. Report. A loud voice sounded outside the door. Reporting to the division commander, the personnel have been assembled. Dismiss on the spot. Chen Qingwan said without hesitation. This is an order. The guard who came to report was motionless. Li Zhonghu didn't even look at Chen Qingwan and said directly, Get ready. We'll march into Wulan State in half an hour. Li Zhonghu. Chen Qingwan stared at Li Zhonghu. Li Zhonghu frowned, waved his hand impolitely and said, Get out. Please remember the domain name of this book. Zhouqian Shenhuang Mobile Version. Chapter 4:15. Pursuit, Fighting and Fleeing. When dawn was about to break, the whole Reki City was in complete chaos. Wulan State was very big. Reki City was outside the halo of the polar sun and the polar night, and there was still a normal alternation of day and night. However, in the time before dawn, the light between heaven and earth was dimmer. Dimness meant vagueness. Vagueness meant chaos. The dazzling light with surging power spread from the north of the city all the way to the center of the city. In the dim environment, a large area of surging and endless light shone out. The battle area was constantly shifting and expanding. The police and the army were all involved. The roaring explosions set off fire, and thunder fell from the sky. The shops, supermarkets, and neatly arranged cars on both sides of the road turned into ruins and wreckage in the majestic power and the explosion of gunpowder. More and more experts joined the chase, and a large number of troops began to block the surrounding roads, forming a human wall one after another. The battle was intermittent. Amidst the raging thunder and fire that filled the sky, there would occasionally be a flash of sword light that tore through all the attacks. Then more light would descend. The extremely turbulent sword chi and light kept changing directions. Under the leadership of the officers, the army that had sealed off the road built a thick ice wall that almost sealed off all the roads. The space for the illusory but extremely terrifying sword light to move became smaller and smaller. When there was nowhere to go, the sword light could only tear the ice wall that had reached a thickness of tens of meters. The sword light became a little slow when tearing the ice wall. Huge ice cubes flew everywhere, blood stained the ice, and countless corpses fell on the street. Although the looming sword light became more and more difficult, it always existed tenaciously. Under the strong intervention of the Rekvia family, all the military forces, police forces, and expert teams in Reki City were all operating. The absolute advantage in numbers almost overwhelmed everything. Ice walls appeared in every corner of the battlefield, flashing with blue light and flying over, raging every inch of space. Li Tianlan's actions were getting more and more difficult. He had never underestimated the relationship between the Rekvia family and the Jiang family of South America, nor had he doubted the influence of the Rekvia family in Reki City. But he did not expect that the military of Wulan State would have such an excellent response speed. From the north of the city to the center of the city, in less than 20 minutes, the lineup to kill him had become incomparably luxurious. At this moment, Li Tianlan could see that there were nearly 6 thunder-shocking realm experts, 2 half-step invincible realm experts, and 1 invincible realm expert chasing after him. The army of Reki City was trying to restrain him at all costs. Even if they had to sacrifice their lives, they didn't want to give Li Tianlan any chance to breathe. Time passed slowly. The losses of Wulan State were getting greater and greater. Li Tianlan was under more and more pressure. Jiang Chenyan completely let go of all distractions and bit Li Tianlan hard. It was not until this moment that he was finally sure that Li Tianlan might not be the strongest invincible realm expert in the dark world, but he was definitely the most difficult to deal with. Shadow Formula, Desperate Dao Chase, Night Travel. Several of the most outstanding body movements in the dark world were completely integrated into his body. He was swift, unpredictable, and impossible to guard against. Jiang Chenyan had a splitting headache. The speed brought by the dual wind and thunder veins to Li Tianlan was not much worse than that of a real invincible realm expert. Jiang Chenyan had trapped Li Tianlan in a situation of certain death many times. But every time he tore apart Li Tianlan with his power, it was a vivid and indistinguishable shadow. The shadow could not only die for Li Tianlan, but it could also swap places with the real body at will, which increased Li Tianlan's flexibility several times. In this state, Jiang Chenyan could beat Li Tianlan, but he couldn't King hit him. Jiang Chenyan suppressed his inner impetuosity and had no idea of giving up. Night travel was the top assassination skill, invisible and traceless. The desperate Dao chase was very fast, and it was unparalleled in both pursuit and evasion. The shadow symbol formula was extremely strange and flexible. The dragon fist was all-encompassing. The 24 moves of sword was unparalleled. Li Tianlan wandered between reality and illusion, and the flashing sword intent carried the power to tear the world apart. The dual wind and thunder veins were perfect. Looking at Li Tianlan from a hostile standpoint, everything he had at this time was enough to make people desperate. Jiang Chenyan was not without a way to restrain Li Tianlan. The problem now was that he did not have that condition. Opportunities were always fleeting. Li Tianlan was so fast that Jiang Chenyan could not make a move. What he needed was distance. Within 30 meters, no matter how many trump cards Li Tianlan had, it was useless. After all, he was not really invincible. The ever-changing 30-meter mortal world could completely imprison Li Tianlan. In the blood and fire that filled the whole battlefield, the battle was in a stalemate. Li Tianlan seemed to be unable to get away. But Jiang Qianyan could not rush to the distance he wanted, either. The whole battlefield kept moving in the city center, smashing several blocks in a row. At some point, the distance between Jiang Qianyan and Li Tianlan seemed to be narrowed for a moment. But before he could make a move, Li Tianlan had already exchanged places with his own shadow. The sky of Reki City gradually lit up. The whole city was in complete chaos. The dense army that surrounded the battlefield, the broken ice wall, the raging thunder and fire, the piles of corpses and blood. Although the municipal government had issued an emergency notice, many pedestrians were still affected. The fire in the city center kept burning, and black smoke rose into the sky. The whole city looked like it had entered a period of war, a scene of doomsday. Orders were issued from Reki City one after another. All the troops around Reki City began to mobilize. At 5:30 in the morning, the Congress of Wulan State officially launched and passed the plan. They were determined to besiege the city. The president of Wulan State personally addressed the world. He said that Reki City was experiencing a disaster, but at the same time, he asked the people to continue to have confidence in their government. At the same time, the foreign minister of Wulan State called Jianghu State continuously, asking Jianghu State to explain the destruction of Reki City by Li Tianlan, the commander of the Snowdance Corps. The ambassador of Wulan State to the United Nations applied for a meeting, asking Jianghu State to give an explanation and make compensation. The deep-rooted dominance of the Rekvia family in Wulan State broke out completely in the shortest time and turned into a frenzy. The application for a meeting of the United Nations was still being reviewed. But the whole world knew about the disaster of Reki City. The whole world was watching Reki City. At the same time, it was also watching Jianghu State and the Snowdance Corps. Everything happened too fast. It was so fast that people couldn't react at all. By the time everyone received the news, the entire situation had completely tilted in an uncontrollable direction. In the face of Wulan State's questioning, in the face of the implicit or tough hints of other major powers, Jianghu State could only remain silent for the time being. But the Snowdance Corps was no longer silent. Just when the whole world was ready to condemn Jianghu State. In the garrison of Jianghu State, an elite army of 5,000 people of the Snowdance Corps left and marched to Wulan State. The whole world was in an uproar. Star State, Snow Country, France, England, Germany, and many other powers in the world called Jianghu State and asked Jianghu State to exercise restraint. Eastern Europe was in chaos. But if possible, no one wanted a real large-scale war to break out in Eastern Europe. If everything was controlled in the conflict of the Dark World, it would be in the best interest of everyone. But the problem was that now the Snowdance Corps seemed to be completely out of control. Jianghu State couldn't contact Li Tianlan at all, not even Chen Qingwan, the vice-marshal of the Snowdance Corps. At 5:50 in the morning, the president of Wulan State's speech to the world had come to an end. The president of Wulan State officially defined Jianghu State as a hostile country and declared that all the members of the Snowdance Corps were terrorists. Any force or country that provided shelter to the Snowdance Corps would become the enemy of Wulan State. Wulan State would fight against the enemy at all costs to maintain the dignity of the motherland. The influence of the Rekvia family had become a giant hand that covered the sky and the sun, stirring up several countries around Wulan State. For a time, 3 countries in Eastern Europe, including Wulan State, defined Jianghu State as a hostile country and the Snowdance Corps as terrorists at the same time. No one could imagine that Jianghu State's entry into Eastern Europe would be so intense. Similarly, no one could imagine that Li Tianlan's approach would cause such a huge chain reaction. The Snowdance Corps was out of control. Li Tianlan was also completely out of anyone's control. But the situation was also out of control. The question was whether Li Tianlan could still control the situation? At present, Li Tianlan seemed to have no way back. Beihai Province. Mount Dibing. Wang Tianzong listened to Chen Qingwan's phone call in silence for a long time. Chen Qingwan was a direct descendant of Wang Qinglei's faction. However, although the internal dangers of the Wang family of Beihai were serious, he did not understand everything before the contradictions were made public. Wang Qinglei did not object to Chen Qingwan getting the position of vice-marshal of the Snowdance Corps, nor did he give him any hints. In this way, Chen Qinghuan naturally did his duty. What excited him more was Li Tianlan's recklessness. He didn't know Li Tianlan's plan, and he wasn't even sure if the young man had a plan. He got off the plane and went straight to Reki City. Unfortunately, he was not strong enough. Now that such a big mess had happened, Chen Qinghuan almost had the urge to cheer. This was an absolutely good opportunity. Perhaps Li Tianlan could not be defined as treason, but with the development of the situation, Jianghu state was under more and more pressure. If the Wang family of Beihai and Kunlun City joined forces, it was entirely possible to force Jianghu state to give up Li Tianlan. At that time, it would be shown that Li Tianlan was a traitor of Jianghu state. Not only would the pressure of Jianghu state disappear, but as the vice-marshal of the Snowdance Corps, for the stability of the Snowdance Corps, Chen Qinghuan would be the best candidate to serve as the commander of the Snowdance Corps. So on the phone, facing Wang Tianzong, whom he usually respected and estranged, Chen Qinghuan's tone had been a little excited. Your Majesty, this is an opportunity. Why don't we join forces with Kunlun City to push it? No hurry. After a long silence, Wang Tianzong slowly said, It's not over yet. Don't rush to conclusions. Wait and see. Chen Qinghuan was stunned. Wang Tianzong silently hung up the phone. However, before the phone was hung up, Wang Tianzong's words shocked Chen Qinghuan. I will arrive in Eastern Europe before tonight. At 6 o'clock in the morning, all the troops of Reki City had been completely assembled. The troops of all the nearby cities were mobilized. Reki City was completely blocked and besieged. Li Tianlan tried his best to move the battlefield, and his actions became more and more difficult. The pursuit continued. Jiang Chenyan was less than 40 meters away from Li Tianlan. The battlefield moved from the north of the city to the city center, nearly 30 kilometers away. The fight that made everyone tremble with fear was about to end. Ahead, in the Holy Thunder Memorial Square of Reki City. For the entire Wulan state, this was a sacred place for heroes. Jiang Chenyan suddenly felt that this square was really good. Although the square was destined to be ruined in this battle, Li Tianlan deserved the honor of this place. Close. More than a dozen monuments tens of meters high on the square looked extremely majestic and solemn in the dawn sky. The morning sun cut through the sky. The morning sun shone from the east. Jiang Chenyan subconsciously narrowed his eyes. His vision blurred for a moment. The next second, Li Tianlan's bloody figure suddenly disappeared in the sunlight. Jiang Chenyan was not in a hurry and just sneered. Now the so-called stealth body movement and optical camouflage were meaningless. Because Eastern Europe was too cold. The square surrounded by tens of thousands of troops was even colder. An ice wall covering the entire square was constantly spreading and taking shape. The ice wall condensed by tens of thousands of people was almost a glacier. It was not easy for Gu Qianchuan or even the experts at the bottom of the divine list to break through such a scale. No matter how sharp Li Tianlan's sword energy was, what could he do? The troops began to gather toward the center of the square from all directions. The condensed glacier blocked the sunlight and slowly squeezed over. Jiang Chenyan's figure stepped into the memorial forest of monuments in the square. There were wisps of light coming out of him and sweeping forward. The light completely enveloped Jiang Chenyan. The blood on his body disappeared from everyone's sight. The light completely covered him. Jiang Chenyan moved slowly, like a leisurely walking sun. The light kept surging. 30-meter mortal world. Glorious holy hall. In an instant, all the light centered on Jiang Chenyan. It spread out and covered the entire square. In the strongest field of the Jiang family of South America, all optical camouflage was meaningless. Jiang Chenyan saw Li Tianlan. All the experts who followed him also saw Li Tianlan. He stood on the tallest monument in the monument forest, holding a long sword. The sword intent on the blade of falling stars whistled. The moment his figure appeared in the domain, the silver light suddenly rose into the sky. The long sword stabbed straight. The silver light burst out. The sword intent was completely restrained, and it looked very ordinary. But as the sword intent of nothingness passed, everything became extremely real in an instant. The silver sword edge was still moving forward. Li Tianlan took a step forward. The light around him changed from real to nothingness, and from nothingness to falsehood. But the illusory sword intent appeared in everyone's mind with incomparable realism. The sword seemed to pierce the space. The sword light lit up. The sword energy had been overwhelming and surging down. Sea-breaking move. The sword energy enveloped all the experts, including Jiang Chenyan. Blood sputtered. Jiang Chenyan was calm. When the sword energy was about to sweep his body, he was calm and even had the mood to smile. 30-meter mortal world. So close. Yet worlds apart. The 30-meter mortal world was fast. But this foot-apart art was even faster. The whole space was obviously distorted. Jiang Chenyan's figure retreated like a cannonball. In the blink of an eye, his figure almost disappeared from Li Tianlan's sight. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows sharply, and the blade of falling stars moved forward again. He seemed to want to chase. "Why can't you see me?" A peaceful voice with a vicious smile suddenly sounded behind Li Tianlan. Bang! Jiang Chenyan, who seemed to have retreated far away, appeared directly behind Li Tianlan and punched him hard in the back of the heart. Thick blood spurted out of his mouth. However, this powerful and heavy punch did not send him flying. All the power rushed into his body, broke out, and became a serious injury. It became an internal injury. Jiang Chenyan laughed. Li Tianlan had the shadow formula. He had the desperate chase. He had the dark night walking. They were all the top body techniques in the dark world. But not all the top body techniques in the dark world belonged to the Li family. 30-meter mortal world was the strongest unique skill of the Jiang family of South America. In other words, the Jiang family of South America only had this unique skill. But the endless changes in it were equally broad and profound. The 3-inch world belonged to the body technique. A short distance between worlds also belonged to the body technique. Li Tianlan's body bent down subconsciously. The vast and spreading domain gathered quickly, with crazy killing intent. 30-meter mortal world. Sinluo Hell. The domain closed. The sound of wind could be heard from every corner of the domain. Masses of air condensed in the domain one after another, eventually turning into swords and sabers. The swords and sabers were all aimed at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan, in a seriously injured state, took the Sinluo Hell head-on. It was not easy to find a whole body, not to mention whether he could survive or not. Jiang Chenyan punched down again. Li Tianlan's figure disappeared in an instant. A shadow broke in front of Jiang Chenyan. Li Tianlan's figure moved sideways in 2 steps, changed his position, and faced Jiang Chenyan. The distance between the two was no more than 5 meters, and they stood on the same monument. "Go in peace." Jiang Chenyan sneered and clenched his fist. The swords and sabers that filled every corner of the domain shook at the same time, like a large torrent, rushing toward Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan held falling stars with both hands. He raised the sword to his eyebrows. This move was not a unique skill. Only sword intent. The purest sword intent surged violently on the blade of falling stars, rushing toward the dense swords and sabers that occupied his field of vision. The swords and sabers perished in the sword intent. However, more and more swords and sabers were rushing over endlessly. The domain of the 30-meter mortal world grew thicker and thicker. It was unbreakable. Li Tianlan's sword intent kept flying in the domain, but it was always a step behind. No skill could make up for this step. This was the gap between the invincible realm on the holy list and the invincible realm. Naked, obvious, close but out of reach. Only a step behind, but the outcome was clear. Li Tianlan's sword intent grew weaker and weaker. In the domain, the mighty swords and sabers turned into a growing torrent, pressing toward Li Tianlan's body. Jiang Chenyan, who was also trying his best to maintain the domain, narrowed his eyes and was about to continue. Boom! The whole monument, which was tens of meters high and nearly 10 meters wide, shook with a bang. A heat wave as violent as magma rose from under his feet, and the flames were monstrous. The army in the distance was still slowly gathering toward the square. But in a few unknown corners of the square, there was sword light and wind and clouds surging. It was like a plan agreed in advance. It was also like a temporary rescue. The sword lights surged and burst out. The killing intent that had been lying in ambush here for a long time burst out at Jiang Chenyan's most relaxed moment. Jiang Chenyan lowered his head. At this moment, he finally understood why Li Tianlan rushed in this direction at the risk of aggravating his injury not long ago. He looked over the tall monument and saw a skinny old man who was already a little bald. The old man appeared silently under the monument and held a corner of the monument in his palm. The raging flames surged up like a surging wave. The whole stone monument instantly turned red and even a little transparent. The old man's arm shook violently. In the boundless heat wave, the whole monument kept shaking. The skinny old man seemed to have pulled the whole monument, which was tens of meters high, out of the ground with one hand, uprooting mountains and rivers. About Chen Qingwan, it seems to have been said that he was a woman. I was going to write that he was a woman at first, but then I thought how bad it was to be a woman. So I did an operation on him. He became a man. It's officially confirmed that Chen Qingwan's operation was successful. He is a man. Genius. 1 second to remember this website. Mobile version. Chapter 4:16. The change in the square was so sudden. Just when everyone thought that the outcome had been decided and Li Tianlan was bound to die, the whole situation plummeted and there were infinite variables in an instant. The vast and thick layer of ice still covered the entire square. But on the icy plaza, under the monument, flames suddenly soared into the sky. The monument, which was tens of meters tall, was almost uprooted. Flames burned from the bottom of the solemn and tall stone pillars. The blazing heat dispelled the chill, and a raging fire that was similar to a domain appeared in everyone's sight. The flames roared and jumped, and the heat waves rolled. The layer of ice formed by the tens of thousands of soldiers suddenly stopped, and then continued to press forward. However, its speed gradually slowed down as if it had met with some kind of resistance. The Sinluo hell transformed from the 30-meter mortal world still suppressed Li Tianlan's sword intent. Jiang Chenyan lowered his head and stared at the old man under the monument with bloodshot eyes. As the second master of the Jiang family of South America, Jiang Chenyan could be unfamiliar with anyone, but he would never be unfamiliar with Jianghu State. The Jiang family of South America was the only superpower that Jianghu State clearly listed as a hostile force. Even the Heroes Club that had invaded Jianghu State had never received such an honor. The Jiang family of South America was rooted in South America, like a big tree with branches and leaves, and had long reached the sky. The feud between Jianghu State and the Jiang family of South America was almost a war from beginning to end. The Jiang family of South America had always stubbornly believed that Jianghu State should have been theirs. After the establishment of Jianghu State, the Jiang family lay dormant in Taiwan Island. After the return of Taiwan Island hundreds of years ago, the Jiang family took root in South America. For a long time, this obsession, which they regarded as hatred, had been supporting their development. They were enemies of Jianghu State and had caused unimaginable damage to Jianghu State. Jianghu State had also caused heavy losses to the Jiang family of South America. In the past hundreds of years, the Wang family of Beihai and the Li family of Jianghu State were at the height of their power, and the Jiang family of South America was not allowed to enter Jianghu State. After the collapse of the Li family and the rise of the Gu family, the Jiang family of South America tentatively set up several strongholds in Jianghu State. However, those strongholds were completely destroyed by Qin Weibai before and after the decisive Battle of Heaven Capital 3 years ago. But the Jiang family of South America never gave up their plan to enter Jianghu State. So in the eyes of the Jiang family of South America, Jianghu State was the biggest enemy. The Jiang family of South America had a deep understanding of the enemy. The Li family, which guarded the stability of a country with the power of a clan, was once one of the most terrifying enemies faced by the Jiang family of South America. Even though the Li family had disappeared for more than 20 years, Jiang Chenyan would never forget some special people in the Li family. Amidst the flames, the old man with the power to uproot mountains and rivers shook the monument. His figure was already in the shadow of the monument. Jiang Chenyan and Li Tianlan shook for a moment at the same time. Jiang Chenyan suddenly raised his head. The moment the domain of the 30-meter mortal world became more condensed, under the monument, the old man's calm and somewhat dull voice slowly rang out. "Waiter, don't you call me uncle when you meet an old friend?" Jiang Chenyan's body staggered. The domain around him relaxed in the blink of an eye. Li Tianlan's sword intent, which was gradually suppressed by the domain, suddenly spread out, trying his best to take the initiative. Jiang Chenyan didn't care. His face instantly flushed red, and even became a distinct purplish-black color. "Fireman!" He gritted his teeth and his hair stood on end. After some time, he let out a ferocious roar. He seemed to have lost his mind as he lifted his leg and stomped on the ground. The tall and majestic monument burst into flames. The great force penetrated the top of the monument, and the whole monument was completely crushed by Jiang Qianyan's foot. Stones flew all over the sky. The 30-meter mortal world temporarily remained high in the sky, suppressing Li Tianlan. Jiang Qianyan, however, seemed to have lost his mind and desperately rushed to Fireman, who suddenly appeared. Fireman had a high seniority in the dark world. Among Li Honghe's sacred guards, Fireman was the youngest one. So when he later went to the Border Control Corps to serve as the vice-marshal to assist Li Guangtu, everyone felt that he had become Li Guangtu's guard again. But the highness he followed was only Li Honghe. In terms of seniority, Li Guangtu had to call him uncle. Jiang Qianyan called Fireman uncle, and the seniority was not wrong. But the other party was Fireman. For Jiang Qianyan, this uncle really contained countless unbearable memories and humiliations. Jiang Qianyan's body fell into the air. His eyes were scarlet and gloomy, full of deep resentment. He would never forget something in his life. More than 2 decades ago, he and his elder brother, Jiang Qiansong, who was not close by blood but was like a brother, broke through to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. At that time, the 2 brothers were full of ambition and were personally responsible for an operation against Jianghu state on the Tiannan border of the Jiang family of South America. The 2 took more than 400 elites of the Jiang family of South America and sneaked into a small village on the border of Jianghu state from the Tiannan border. But then, in less than 8 hours, the sacred guards of the Li family pounced directly. 2 people. Only 2 people. That night, the cruel poison spread through the village in the wind, and thunder burst out all over the sky. Hundreds of elites of the Jiang family of South America died under that man's hand. He and Jiang Qiansong, 2 at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, joined forces, but they were no match for a fire-flaming realm expert. 3 punches. The other party only punched 3 times. The battle was strange, short, and fierce. The poison spread and swirled in the wind. The raging fire was raging in the night sky. Within 3 punches, he and Jiang Qiansong were completely crushed and eventually defeated. That was the Li family at its peak. Just 2 sacred guards, Poison Doctor and Fireman. But they completely destroyed the plan of the Jiang family of South America in the shortest time. What Jiang Qianyan remembered most was not the strength of the Li family, but the insult, even humiliation, that the man codenamed Fireman brought to the 2 brothers after their failure. They just slaughtered a small village of untouchables in Jianghu state. What did they do wrong? But that son of a bitch was Fireman. yen %% and asterisk, hashtag yen %% and asterisk, no grace, no dignity. At this moment, Jiang Qianyan seemed to be completely crazy. His face twisted, he opened his mouth, and a stream of cold and hot air poured into his mouth. His voice was distorted and vague, but countless vicious voices, like shrews cursing in the street, suddenly rang through heaven and earth. In just a few seconds, Fireman's closest family members had been cursed. But Fireman had no relatives. He looked up and saw Jiang Qianyan coming down from the sky, getting closer and closer. Then he punched. Suddenly, the silent and somewhat dull Fireman's momentum changed and became extremely sharp and fierce. The majestic power shattered the surrounding stones in an instant. Fireman's bones kept shaking. The punch hit the air, but it seemed to penetrate the space. The whole space suddenly twisted and broke completely. The broken space was not filled with silence and darkness. The heat wave that filled the world suddenly surged out of the broken space in an instant. Fire. The incomparably condensed fire occupied everyone's sight. The raging fire surged and spread wildly in all directions with Fireman's fist as the center. It seemed to be floating, but it also seemed to be flowing. The fire that filled the world was burning like solid magma. In an instant, the magma completely replaced the world and the ice that was pressing toward the square. There were burning flames and flowing magma in the sky and on the ground. Wherever the fire passed, the domain, the sword energy, and the void all fluctuated completely in an instant. The world was boiling. The punch was so familiar, but it was completely different. Jiang Qianyan's eyes became dazed in rage, and then awe-inspiring. The punch. Li Tianlan had just used it. Dragon Fist. Azure Dragon Cannon. The punch was like the Dragon Fist, but not quite. It was more like Fireman's own fist, his own martial arts. Jiang Chenyan sobered up in anger for a moment. But the punch that shattered the space had already swept over with the raging fire all over the sky. Those who could be the Li family's sacred guards were all strong men. And with the personal guidance of the Li family's highness, the strong were naturally stronger. The Li family's sacred guards had their own characteristics. In those days, Li Honghe either taught them the unique skills of the Li family or standardized their martial arts path according to their own characteristics, spending countless efforts. Only Fireman was the most worry-free. He had his own path and was not interested in the Li family's 24 moves of sword. He was too lazy to use a sword, so from beginning to end, he just asked Li Honghe for the first 3 punches of the Dragon Fist. The most basic 3 punches. He integrated his martial arts into these 3 punches. So Fireman only knew these 3 punches. In any battle, he used 3 punches, over and over again. The simple ones were often the most flawless. Jiang Chenyan finally realized the horror of Fireman. The man who could suppress him and Jiang Qiansong on his own should have entered the Invincible Realm, entered the Divine List, and entered the top of the Divine List. More than 20 years in prison had completely ruined his path to the Invincible Realm. But even if he was not invincible, in the fire-flaming realm, he was not easy to bully. The fire, like a raging wolf, completely swept Jiang Chenyan. Boom! A terrible explosion suddenly sounded in the sky. The sword intent that tore the space completely lost its restraint. Li Tianlan's figure disappeared in an instant. But the next second, the extremely terrible sword intent had changed from illusory to incomparably real. The sword light was like a dragon. Without any hesitation, it pierced directly into his back. Jiang Chenyan's heart sank completely. He was really excited to see Fireman again, but what he thought more was that Fireman had been in the desert for so many years. At his age, his strength must have regressed at this time. As long as he killed him, he could concentrate on dealing with Li Tianlan. But he underestimated Fireman's strength and also let Li Tianlan out of trouble. Neither of them had a clear realm. Fireman was in the fire-flaming realm, but he had already transcended it. Li Tianlan had no realm. But the strength of the two was almost the same. When he couldn't attack, he could only let go. A vast domain expanded directly around Jiang Chenyan. There was no wind in the air, but the whole space turned into an irresistible airflow. The space kept pushing outward. 30-meter mortal world, boundless sea and sky. The whole space turned into a hurricane seemed to completely push Fireman and Li Tianlan away. The 2 half-step invincible realm experts of the Rekvia family, Wuxia and Henry, arrived at the scene. Behind them, more experts of Reki City also rushed over. Jiang Chenyan's heart had not completely relaxed. On the square, which was getting smaller and smaller under the pressure of the ice, the sword intent and the wind and clouds surged at the same time. The ice blocked the sun. In the dim space, the majestic sea of sword shadows appeared in every corner of the square without warning. No brewing, no preparation. The moment the sea of sword shadows formed, they suddenly broke out. The sword shadows were like a curtain. The sharp but fleeting sword shadows were completely aimlessly sweeping and raging. Tens of thousands of sword shadows rushed to Wuxia and Henry. They rushed to the experts who were chasing after them. They rushed to the army surrounding the square. They were overwhelming. The power of one sword was almost earth-shattering. This was the momentum of the peak of the invincible realm. Wuxia and Henry changed their faces at the same time. Without thinking about it, they turned around and ran. Jiang Chenyan saw all this clearly. He suddenly opened his mouth. "Come back, it's all fake." Before he could finish speaking, an even louder and clearer voice suddenly swept across the battlefield. Borrowing the sword to Yin and Yang. Ice and fire intertwined on the battlefield. Ice was Yin. Raging fire was Yang. Borrowing the sword. There was a clear and crisp sound of a long sword being unsheathed on the battlefield. Fireman let go of his control. The boundless raging fire and ice kept surging and madly condensed above Jiang Chenyan's head. The Yin and Yang sword intent circulated. In the blink of an eye, 2 different kinds of light appeared above Jiang Chenyan's head. It was like the sun and the moon shining together. The light was cold and hot. At the same time, the sword curtain, which was comparable to the full blow of the peak of the invincible realm, swept Henry and Wuxia. It swept the tens of thousands of troops in the square. The mighty sword curtain, like a sudden heavy snow, rushed past everyone. Huangxue and Hanri, who were in despair, were stunned for a moment. The two superiors of the half-step invincible realm looked at their bodies with some doubts. In the square, the mighty sword curtain had disappeared. And the actual power of the sword, which was comparable to the peak of the invincible realm, was far less than that of the ice-condensing realm. The sword curtain swept all the way, but did not leave even a wound on the two. All the terrifying aura was just an illusion. Or rather, a phantom. Phantom sword intent. Fuck. Henry scolded loudly, and he couldn't tell whether he was glad or angry. The two looked at each other and were about to step forward. Just when their emotions fluctuated the most. It was the perfect time. Two shadows had already silently appeared behind the two of them. There was no sound, no murderous intent, no thunder. Thunder, raging fire, and cold wind. In a gentle silence, two sharp blades quietly pierced the back of the heads of the two superiors of the half-step invincible realm. The pain went away in an instant. Boundless darkness came. The moment they sank into the eternal darkness, the two superiors of the half-step invincible realm didn't even know what happened. The wind and clouds converged behind the two bodies for a moment, and then silently disappeared into the void. Cool breeze and drifting cloud. Xianxia, who saw this scene with his own eyes, suddenly blacked out and almost spat out a mouthful of blood. The false phantom sword curtain passed. The real phantom sword appeared directly near Xianxia the moment the yin-yang sword intent was formed. Li Tianlan, who was pushed out, stood in the distance, where he was. In his sight, there was the sword curtain not long ago and the sun and moon formed by the yin-yang sword intent. The scene was familiar. Just like on Lonely Mountain, Wang Tianzong's magnificent sword curtain and Lin Fengting's sun and moon in the palm. The scenes seemed to be similar, but the artistic conception was far from it. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes, felt the touch in his heart, and clenched the falling stars in his hand. Fireman, who was also pushed out, began to charge. The terrible flame burned him recklessly, and the space was evaporated. Almost in an instant, a pseudo-domain that was only half a line away from the real domain appeared around Fireman. It was only a little bit away from the real domain. Water-like magma surged and boiled in the pseudo-domain. The yin-yang sword intent rotated wildly. The sun and moon shone together, and yin and yang merged. The phantom sword intent was no longer a phantom, but combined with the yin-yang sword intent, condensed in one point, and stabbed into the domain around Xianxia. There was a small breach in the domain. Then it was completely merged with the pseudo-domain around Fireman. Two shocking killing intents came out from different directions. Cool breeze and drifting cloud rushed to Xianxia from different directions. The threat of death really shrouded him. Xianxia's expression changed dramatically. Two experts with the combat capability of the invincible realm. Two sword masters of the half-step invincible realm. Two assassins at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. The situation suddenly changed. This was a real desperate situation of life and death. 30-meter mortal world. The beginning of all things. Without any reservation, Xianxia improved his domain regardless of everything, even regardless of the drop in his realm. The beginning of all things was quiet. 30-meter mortal world spread over, resisted the raging fire, blocked the sun and moon, shattered the phantom, and obliterated the killing intent gathered by the wind and clouds. Amidst the silence, a flash of sword light appeared in a place that was both very far and very near. Li Tianlan raised the broken star. The silver sword light was soundless, faint, and cold. Everything in the whole world seemed to disappear in an instant. There was no heaven and earth, no things, no mortal world, no raging fire and domain. The world was a sword. What was illusory was an illusion. What was real was the sword intent. Only the sword intent. The sword light tore through the illusion and floated forward in the most real world. There was no speed. Fast and slow completely lost its meaning in the silence. Xianxia's eyes became extremely frightened. Under the restraint of countless external forces, he could not stop this sword. He really didn't want to die. He had never thought that he would die here. He was the second master of the Jianghu family of South America. He was an invincible realm expert. He would rush into the divine list and make the Jianghu family of South America more glorious. He would kill Li Tianlan, occupy Qinwei Bai, and even take over Zhongzhou state. There were too many things he had not done. How could he die? How could he die? The sword light floated to his chest in the silence. The long sword flashed. Li Tianlan held the sword and stabbed forward. But his figure had completely disappeared. At this moment, the only thing Jiang Chenyan could see was the sword intent that made him doubt the world. Or rather, only the tip of the sword. This was Li Tianlan's kendo. Reality and illusion. Like the heaven-cutting move, the sea-breaking move, and the forever silent world. This move was called shattering. The shattering move tore up the domain around Jiang Chenyan. There was no stagnation or slowness. The sword edge floated forward. Puff! The sharp sword edge instantly pierced Jiang Chenyan's heart. The sword chi completely exploded in his body, mincing his heart, mincing his internal organs, and cutting off all his life force. Jiang Chenyan's frightened eyes dimmed instantly. Because it was dim. So the second master of the Jiang family of South America seemed extremely calm at this time. All the sword intent and domain around him disappeared completely. Jiang Chenyan desperately tried to keep his last trace of vitality. He stood in the air, swaying. Li Tianlan frowned. He was keenly aware that something was wrong and said without hesitation, "Retreat! Retreat!" Jiang Chenyan's faint voice sounded, but it was like thunder. The corners of his mouth curled up, and he smiled. His smile was filled with unwillingness and resentment. "I will fall, but all of you will die with me." His voice became smaller and smaller, but in the last glow of his life, his aura suddenly began to swell and climb. Together, Jiang Chenyan's body lit up. In the light there was his own domain. There was fire, thunder, ice, and hurricane. There were also phantoms, yin and yang, and fireman's pseudo-domain. Everything swelled up in the tiny domain around him. "Die!" His voice fell. All of Jiang Chenyan's unique skills, as well as the power that had just attacked Jiang Chenyan, burst out completely. This was a full blow from an invincible realm expert on the holy list, knowing that he would die. It was also the final move of the 30-meter mortal world. 30-meter mortal world. Live as long as heaven and earth. I live as long as heaven and earth. If I am silent, heaven and earth will be silent. It broke out. The terrifying power burst out in an instant without the slightest preparation. There was no time to react. The surging light, with a final blow of the invincible realm, spread to several high-level members of the Snowdance Corps almost instantly. Xianxia, the Phantom Swordmaster, and Han Chongyang, the Yin and Yang Swordmaster, stood in front. A fierce and majestic force came from behind, pulling the two unprepared people back. The space was slightly blurred. Li Tianlan took a step out. His figure was so natural, so casual. However, amidst the destructive light of heaven and earth, he took a step forward and appeared in front of everyone, blocking everything. Without hesitation. Genius 1 second to remember our website. Mobile version. Chapter 417. This scene was so familiar. It was so familiar that everyone was in a trance. 30-meter secular world, longevity with heaven and earth. This was the final move, but it could no longer be considered a lost art. This was an invincible realm expert releasing all his potential vitality, all the martial arts he had practiced in this life, and even the power of the enemy's attack on him in the most thorough way. The blow of an invincible realm expert perishing together with the enemy. No one could block this attack. In the desperate situation of life and death, Li Tianlan stood calmly and casually in front of everyone. Calmness was a kind of power. Li Tianlan was so calm, as if he was born to stand there. Whether it was glory, humiliation, or a hopeless situation of certain death, he should stand there. The eyes of Phantom Sword Master Xianxia of Mount Shu sect seemed to have lost all their luster in an instant. She became dull and lost in thought. The strong and real sword intent seemed to have locked down the entire space. The entire space was constantly being pulled back by the sword intent. In a hurry, Han Chongyang inadvertently glanced at Xianxia's expression and sighed softly in his heart. He was the Yin-Yang Swordmaster of Mount Shu. Among the 4 great swordmasters, only he was about the same age as Xianxia, so he naturally knew some of Xianxia's past. Back then, when Xianxia's realm was still low and she was traveling in Jianghu state, she was once intercepted by the first elder of Azura Path. In a deadly situation, it was a young man she met on the road who solved all of this for her. Finally, It formed an entanglement that might not even be regarded as an ill-fated relationship. Presumably, that year in the northeast of Jianghu state, in the same world of ice and snow, there was also a man standing in front of him like today. That man was called Li Guangtu. On this day, it was Li Tianlan who stood in front of her. It was like a joke full of dry humor. Fate, history, the past, all of them were in the cycle of reincarnation. In a sense, perhaps life was just repeating itself. Han Chongyang seemed to have thought of something as well, but he was the first to come to his senses. The confined space kept pulling him back. Han Chongyang raised the yin-yang sword that was already unsheathed. "Senior sister." He suddenly let out a low growl. Yun Qinshi looked at Li Tianlan. Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud were looking at Li Tianlan. Fireman was also looking at Li Tianlan. All he could see was the back view. The silhouette was not tall or burly. But in the face of the ice, wind, fire, lightning, and the flickering light of the sun and moon, in the chaotic scene, his figure revealed an indescribable firmness and calmness. Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud thought of Situ Tsongyue, the governor of Sai City, who would stand in front of everyone in a critical situation, and of Tribulation, who would inevitably stand with Situ Tsongyue. Fireman thought of Li Honghe, who always stood at the forefront of the Li family and Jianghu state. Everyone had a leader in their hearts. As long as he stood there, no matter what situation he faced, whether it was death or disaster, as long as he was there would be a reassuring force. At this moment, in a critical situation, Li Tianlan appeared in that position and seemed to have the same power. Fireman chuckled. For the first time in decades, he smiled so peacefully, as if he had never experienced decades of imprisonment and countless people's criticism and ridicule. Everything else seemed unimportant. Most importantly, he finally saw the Li family that could stand in front of everyone for the first time. The Li family was very young. But he was fearless. Fireman suddenly let out a long roar. Under the rising sun on the horizon, there seemed to be countless rays of light gathering toward him in an instant. Vaguely, the old man, who was already a little stooped, seemed to straighten his back and restore the calm, silent, and energetic years of his peak. But he was old after all. No matter how unwilling he was and how unconvinced he was also old. Fireman was laughing, but he wanted to cry inside. All those who knew Fireman knew that he not only had the hope to enter the invincible realm, but he had almost absolute certainty that he could enter the invincible realm. 40 years old was a threshold in the invincible realm. But it was not absolute. On the long road of martial arts, there would always be accidents. More than 20 years ago, Fireman was just in his early 40s. His state was very good and even rising. If it hadn't been for the treason case more than 20 years ago, the Li family was still at its peak. Even today, the Li family had 3 experts on the divine list in one family. But how could everything in the world be satisfactory? During his time in the desert prison, every year, Fireman knew that his hope was getting smaller and smaller. Until his state began to decline. He realized that he was really old. And this feeling had become so obvious today. At that time, he could crush Jiang Qiansong and Jiang Chenyan on his own. Now, the person he crushed was a divine list. One was on the holy list. What about himself? Half-step invincible realm. Some of his unwillingness had gradually faded. When he came out of the prison this time, he was Li Tianlan's bodyguard, a close guard. He was glad that he chose the path in prison. At least he still had a chance to play his part. Fireman's clenched fist trembled slightly. His fingers slowly opened. What even Li Tianlan didn't know was that as soon as Li Tianlan left the desert, Fireman changed his path. He abruptly cut off his road to the invincible realm, which was close at hand but already out of reach. His martial arts path was still there, but he had completely changed his martial arts philosophy. He was the strongest fire-flaming realm expert. In the past few years, as his physical state continued to decline, what he sought was the strongest explosive force. Just like the Wang family of Beihai. A genius who should have been at the top of the divine list, had no hope of reaching the invincible realm in his life. After all his unwillingness and anger gradually turned to peace, Fireman had only the determination and firmness to play his part. Outbreak. Outbreak at all costs. Fireman's fist slowly opened. This simple action seemed to use up all his strength, so that it was extremely difficult for him to open his 5 fingers. The fist turned into a palm. The sun gathered on Fireman. In a flash, the fire as bright as the sun burned all over him. He aimed his outstretched palm at Xianxia and shook it slightly. There was peace in the air. Suddenly, in front of Xianxia's bursting domain, a huge and terrifying palm print nearly a kilometer long appeared. The palm print was just a shadow, but it was condensed into a substance by the raging fire. The glacier, which had been torn apart by the aftermath of the fight between several masters, hit the palm print. Large pieces of ice surged and burst. The solid palm print almost covered the sky and the earth, completely enveloping all of Xianxia's domains. No! Xianxia, who stood only by his obsession, suddenly roared. Everyone was in action. The phantom sword intent and the yin-yang sword intent surged like a sword river, and the sharp sword energy gathered in the palm print. Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud, who were not good at frontal attacks, also broke out with all his strength. Li Tianlan stood in front of everyone, his figure like a sword. He locked the whole space and kept retreating, getting farther and farther away from Xianxia. Xianxia's last roar finally fell. The power of the dying counterattack of the invincible realm between heaven and earth exploded directly in the flaming palm print with each finger like a skyscraper. The incredible and violent power completely shattered the space. The fingerprint trembled under the impact of the power and collapsed completely in an instant. Ice, hurricane, flame, and thunder. Everything became transparent and turned into the pure power of destruction. Like a tsunami, it rolled into the sky and rushed toward Li Tianlan. Looking forward from Li Tianlan's point of view, the monstrous power rolled up the raging tide, boiling and spreading in the air. As the raging tide passed, the glacier condensed by tens of thousands of troops had completely melted. The sun shone down, but there was no light. All the light was absorbed by that power and turned into pure cold and darkness. Such momentum was simply earth-shattering. But the surging and majestic outbreak was blocked by the palm print for a moment. The moment was very short. But in a very short time, it was full of vitality. Li Tianlan's confined space kept retreating. His entire person had completely turned into a sword. The sword light was unsheathed, and its sharpness was shocking. The torrent of destruction of the world completely covered Li Tianlan in an instant. Amidst the coldness and silence, there was only a sword light swaying in the air. The sword light was unusually weak, like a candle in the wind, but extremely tenacious, like the most eternal light in the darkness. The world was destroyed, and everything turned to ashes. Only one sword still existed. The confined space no longer retreated. The weak sword light standing in the front completely blocked all the power of destruction. The majestic power washed the sword light, rolled back, and washed again. The sword light swayed and rose in the darkness, and kept going up. The light became smaller and smaller in the darkness, but it became more and more dazzling. In the long, seemingly eternal darkness, the inextinguishable light suddenly became the most awe-inspiring sword energy. The sword energy condensed into a bundle. The silver blade of falling stars was completely carved in a dark void domain. The light was rising, expanding, and finally rising to the highest point. It was like a dazzling star in the darkness. The stars suddenly rotated wildly in the highest place of the darkness. The dark power surged wildly with the rotation of the stars. The whole darkness had been completely shrouded by the sword intent. It was a completely strange sword intent. It was not vast, heavy, or turbulent. There was only coldness and sharpness. There was only tearing. This sword was different from the heaven-cutting move, sea-breaking move, and shattering move. However, this imperfect sword became the most suitable sword to break the stalemate. Sky-splitting move. The dark tide continued to shatter under the rotation of the stars. The destructive power all over the sky was completely transferred to another direction under this sword. In the sudden loud noise, the rotating stars stagnated for a moment. Then the flowing fire suddenly appeared in the darkness, tearing the darkness in silence. The flowing fire and the stars burning in the darkness fell at the same time. Or the darkness was rising. The darkness began to surge wildly. There was a sound between heaven and earth, and a shrill wail came from all directions. The light began to reappear. Vaguely, the people who were blocked by Li Tianlan finally saw the young leader. He was still holding the silver long sword, but his body was completely unbalanced, and he fell from the sky with blood splashing. Cool Breeze's figure flickered and appeared directly beside Li Tianlan. He reached out to catch his body and fell to the ground. The white cloud silk clothes were completely broken again. Li Tianlan, who was covered in blood, held the sword in one hand and crushed a button on the inside of his white clothes with the other hand. Code name of the potion: Natural Healing. It was one of the most advanced gene potions developed by Jianghu state. It was extremely rare, but extremely powerful. This was a real life-saving thing. It might not be as good as the immortality potion, which could increase vitality and longevity, but the healing function of natural healing was not much different from that of immortality potion. It was just that the immortality potion increased vitality to heal the body's injuries, so that people could return to their peak state in the shortest time, and it was a complete recovery. But the function of natural healing was to extract the vitality of the injured, and could only temporarily restore the injured to the strongest state. However, this temporary period of time was 3 days. 3 days of peak time was enough for Li Tianlan to do a lot of things. Li Tianlan poured the powder in the button into his mouth and swallowed it with blood. He looked at Jiang Chenyan's position. But Jiang Chenyan had disappeared. In his line of sight, there was only a cloud of dust that was blown away by the wind. The gray dust drifted in the air and eventually returned to dust. The invincible realm had fallen. Li Tianlan twitched the corner of his mouth and turned to look at Fireman. The effect of the natural healing began to spread. His body was now perfect, and he had drunk a whole set of immortality potions. His recovery ability was incredibly strong. Under the effect of the natural healing, his spirit began to gradually recover, and his pale face also had some color. "Old man," Li Tianlan called out in a hoarse voice. Fireman, supported by Drifting Cloud, was on the verge of collapse. His physical state was already declining. In the pursuit of full strength, it meant that he would immediately lose all his combat effectiveness after a real blow with all his strength. "I won't die. I'm just temporarily out of strength." Fireman shook his head, his voice reluctant. He leaned on Drifting Cloud and looked elsewhere on the battlefield. The sacred and solemn memorial square in Reki City had become a complete mess. In sight, blood, corpses, and broken ice almost occupied everything. Li Tianlan's fourth sword intent was called Sky Splitting. This sword was not yet perfect. But while tearing the sky apart, this sword also led the power of Jiang Chenyan's dying counterattack to fall in all corners of the square. He couldn't take this sword. The only thing he could do was to lead it. So the final result of this sword was equivalent to Jiang Chenyan's dying power, Li Tianlan's full blow, Fireman, Cool Breeze, Drifting Cloud, Yin and Yang Phantom, and everyone else's full blow fell on the square. There were troops in every corner of the square, and they were countless experts of Reki City. This blow might not kill everyone, but the ice layer built by the army had completely disappeared. Among the countless corpses, many of the injured were groaning and struggling. As far as the eye could see, the whole square was full of broken corpses and blood, full of wailing like hell. Hell in the sword. There were few people left standing on the whole battlefield. Li Tianlan watched it all calmly. There was only a kind of coldness and indifference in his eyes that chilled people's hearts. "Get out of here right now," Li Tianlan said. "Heal first." "And then?" Fireman asked, raising his eyebrows. "And then?" Li Tianlan glanced around. Jiang Chenyan's final move was called Living with Heaven and Earth. Living with Heaven and Earth. Heaven and Earth were silent. Judging from the result in front of them, the world of Reki City was really going to be silent. Li Tianlan smiled. His smile was peaceful, but with his face covered in blood, he looked indescribably ferocious and crazy. "Then go to the Rekvia family," he said calmly. Genius 1 second to remember this site address. Mobile version. Chapter 4:18. Everything had been planned long ago. The premise of the plan was that everyone had absolute trust in each other's strength. Li Tianlan believed that Cool Breeze, Drifting Cloud, the 2 sword masters of Mount Shu, and Fireman could destroy all the elites of the Jiang family of South America stationed in Reki City in the shortest time. And they also believed that Li Tianlan had the strength to fight with Jiang Chenyan. Jiang Chenyan had to die. The Jiang family of South America had to withdraw from the game in Eastern Europe in the shortest time with scars. In Jianghu state, on the way, and when he was about to reach Eastern Europe, Li Tianlan had been thinking. He had sorted out all the information he could get in Eastern Europe. The conclusion he got was simple. At least during the period when the Snowdance Corps had just entered Eastern Europe, Li Tianlan could be sure that he was safe. He knew how important the information that Qin Weibai used to threaten the Wang family of Beihai was. That information might not be a sharp weapon to sink the economic giant ship of the Wang family of Beihai, but it was enough to put that giant ship in jeopardy. There were a lot of problems pointed out in that information. Every problem could be said to be a secret of the Wang family of Beihai. The Wang family of Beihai would not touch him until those problems were solved. As for Kunlun City, with Gu Xingyun seriously injured, Kunlun City had lost much of its spirit. At least for now, Kunlun City was following the footsteps of the Wang family of Beihai in dealing with the Li family. Li Tianlan was not sure how long it would take for the Wang family of Beihai to solve these problems, but he was sure that Eastern Europe was safe for him in the beginning. Safety meant space. Li Tianlan really needed some space to do something. The Jiang family of South America was one of his main goals, and Jiang Chenyan was the beginning of the whole plan. That was why Cool Breeze, Drifting Cloud, Yin and Yang Phantom, and Fireman ambushed in this square. This was the place they had originally planned. It was located in the center of the city, about the same distance from their respective battle sites. Li Tianlan was a little farther from here, but it was just enough to ensure that when he attracted Jiang Chenyan, others could ambush here. So it became the most likely place to kill Jiang Chenyan. Of course, Jiang Chenyan had the right to choose not to come. But Li Tianlan, who had successfully escaped, also had the ability to rush out of Reki City and sweep all the elites of the Jiang family of South America in Wulan State with several high-level members of the Snowdance Corps. But Li Tianlan was sure of his value. He was sure of his value to the Jiang family of South America, the Wang family of Beihai, and Kunlun City. The beginning of this plan was not complicated. He trusted his companion's abilities. Trust your own worth. Therefore, the entire plan had enough possibilities. Jiang Chenyan's death was bound to shake the whole dark world. Li Tianlan could not grasp the attitude of the Jiang family of South America. But for him, he was here, and the Jiang family of South America had only two choices. Either retreat, or die. This so-called plan was so abrupt, and there were countless risks and variables behind it, so it seemed extremely reckless. But Li Tianlan knew very well that if there were no accidents, the beginning would be the time when his will was the freest in the entire Eastern European chaos. Only at this time could he truly do what he wanted to do without any scruples. Perhaps all of this was urgent. However, the burden on his back did not allow him to remain silent any longer. So what if he was a little anxious? Every story needs a beginning. If controlling the Snowdance Corps was only the beginning of his ascension to the high-level stage of Jianghu State, then the action against the Jiang family of South America and Eastern Europe was the prelude to his sprint to the peak of the Dark World. He had only 3 days. Everything had to be solved in 3 days. In addition to being fast, he had to be fast. Jiang Chenyan's death was silent and earth-shattering. When the news of his death began to spread out of Reki City and Wulan State, Li Tianlan and others, who had deliberately lost contact with Jianghu State, had moved to an old apartment not far from the city center. The natural healing drug was extremely effective. In less than 2 hours, Li Tianlan's internal and external wounds had become completely stable. Li Tianlan, who had returned to his peak state, walked out of the room. Several other rooms in the apartment were still silent. In the battle in the square, Jiang Chenyan's final performance fully explained what the real invincible realm was. The gap between the top of the holy list and the bottom of the divine list had become blurred under the dying counterattack. If Fireman hadn't tried his best to stop it for a moment and Li Tianlan had resisted it by himself, no matter how powerful the natural healing potion was, it would not have allowed Li Tianlan to recover his ability to move now. That was the style of living with heaven and earth that almost killed everyone. After all, he underestimated Jiang Chenyan. But such underestimation was good and bad. Jiang Chenyan's last move was extremely powerful, but they survived. The move of living with heaven and earth was drawn to the army of Reki City by the sky-splitting style. Under the explosion of infinite power, Reki City lost at least thousands of elites who could immediately join the battle. This was undoubtedly beneficial to their next plan. A balding, ordinary European man sat in the living room of the apartment. His body was straight. When he saw Li Tianlan coming out, he subconsciously stood up, looking extremely cautious and serious. Li Tianlan waved his hand and motioned him to sit down. How did the outside world react? He asked directly. The news of Jiang Qianyan's death has spread. However, we have yet to receive any feedback from the major powers. Everyone is currently focused on another matter. The European man was no longer young. He was in his 50s, but his face had a natural seriousness and caution, making him look a little old-fashioned. He glanced at Li Tianlan. He hesitated for a moment before saying, "Your Highness, you are in trouble now. In other words, your snow dance corps has hemp. How annoying. Wulong State and 2 nearby countries have listed Jianghu State as a hostile country because of your action. Wulong State announced an hour ago that it had cut off diplomatic relations with Jianghu State. Oh, the busiest one is the United Nations. The United Nations is holding a meeting. Most of the powerful countries in our impression are attending this meeting. At present, even Snow Country's attitude is moving closer to Wulong State." He spoke Chinese very fluently. After saying the most important information, he paused. When Li Tianlan had almost digested it, he whispered, "Now the whole world is waiting for Jianghu State's explanation." "And Jianghu State?" He looked into Li Tianlan's eyes and said, "Waiting for your explanation." Li Tianlan was silent, as if he had never responded to Jianghu State, without saying a word. For the time being, he remained silent, and Jianghu State could only remain silent. "What's your name?" Li Tianlan asked suddenly. The middle-aged man stood up again, bowed slightly and whispered, "Gandalf. Your Highness, my name is Gandalf Guard." Gandalf Guard. About 5 years ago, he entered Wulong State from Germany to do the catering business. His business was neither good nor bad. It was ordinary. His personality and his restaurant were the same as the apartment he owned. On the surface, there was nothing special about them. But in fact, in terms of seniority, Gandalf's seniority in the Samsara Palace was no less than that of some supermasters who joined the Samsara Palace later. In the Samsara Palace, he was one of the few people whose name could be remembered by all the high-level officials. The secondary intelligence chief in Eastern Europe. He was responsible for the intelligence collection of several countries in Eastern Europe, with Wulong State as the core. In the unknown but extremely sophisticated comprehensive assessment of the Samsara Palace, Gandalf was also one of the few 5-star intelligence officers. Li Tianlan had little contact with Qin Wei Bai. But since he became the commander of the Snowdance Corps, he had gradually come into contact with some of the core secrets of the mysterious organization, Samsara Palace. In the case that he temporarily cut off contact with Jianghu State, Gandalf's existence was equivalent to his eyes, as well as the source of logistical support and intelligence. Gandalf. Li Tianlan nodded. He repeated, "Well, Gandalf, according to your analysis, where is the bottom line of Jianghu State?" Gandalf was silent for a while. "It's impossible to judge at the moment. It depends on the pressure that the major powers put on Jianghu State. Wulong State has defined your action as a war between Jianghu State and Wulong State. All the major powers now have a reason to intervene. Your Highness, it's not easy for you to be in Jianghu State. If you ask me, instead of guessing where Jianghu State is, it's better to investigate how much Jianghu State trusts you," Gandalf said slowly. Li Tianlan was silent for a long time. They were actually asking the same question. Jianghu State could not choose to go to war with the whole world. In the face of the pressure from all countries, when Jianghu State could not bear it, it would inevitably abandon Li Tianlan. If Jianghu State did not trust him, it might even make this decision earlier. What Li Tianlan had to do was to reverse everything in Wulong State before Jianghu State made the decision to abandon him. What he had to reverse was more than his own disadvantage. It was the situation of the entire Wulong State. This was a real upheaval. As expected, Li Tianlan said blandly. But the situation is not necessarily optimistic. Gandalf reminded him. "It's not that bad." A voice suddenly rang out. Fireman, whose aura was still a little weak but stable, walked out of the room and said quietly, "Jianghu State can still give us 2 or 3 days." 2 or 3 days. Li Tianlan's peak would only last for these 2 or 3 days. Once the time was over, he would have to recuperate. Such a situation could not be said to be serious or easy. It could only be summed up by Li Tianlan's words just now. It was expected. If this trip to Wulong State was successful, He and the Snow Dance Corps would directly establish enough prestige in Jianghu State and the Dark World. If they failed, there was no explanation. There was no need for any explanation. It was like a big gamble. It looked thrilling. But Li Tianlan had enough chips in his hand. Li Tianlan silently felt the strange feeling of really standing on the cusp of the storm, and his heart was full of mixed feelings. Enough. He suddenly glanced at Fireman and asked, "Old man, how are you? Can I be worse than you?" Fireman snorted. At that time, he limited his strength to the real limit of the fire-flaming realm and did not lose to Li Tianlan. Now 3 years later, his state had declined, but his explosive power was more sufficient. Although the old man was old, he was still confident. Li Tianlan chuckled, and his eyes gradually became relaxed and warm. In the desert prison, he had been with Fireman day and night for more than a year. From childhood to adulthood, apart from Li Honghe and the veterans of the Li family, only Fireman had been with him the longest. Confirm Schenker's location. Li Tianlan suddenly glanced at Gandalf and said calmly, "Jiang Qianyan was dead." The patriarch of the Rekvia family, who was supreme in Wulon State, was their next target. Gandalf nodded and began to dial the phone. Now we have to find more than Gandalf. We have to worry about another person. Fireman suddenly glanced at Li Tianlan and said, "Jiang Qiansong." He and Jiang Qianyan are not biological brothers, but their relationship is better than that of biological brothers. Little heir died here. He will come here as soon as he gets the news. Fireman paused and suddenly asked, "I heard that there was a black ghost in the Dark World in recent years." Well, Black Ghost is a code name. He is the leader of dozens of tribes in Africa and the guardian deity in the eyes of African locals. Li Tianlan thought of the information he had received and said slowly, "I heard that the Jiang family of South America planned to set up a death training camp in Africa to compete with the Wang family of Beihai in Africa. At present they should have achieved something." Fireman muttered to himself. Li Tianlan glanced at him and seemed to think of something. He laughed and said, "Old man, what hatred do you have with the two brothers of the Jiang family of South America? There was something wrong with Jiang Qianyan's reaction when he saw you. I taught them a lesson. His father came to apologize to the Li family. The two brothers called me uncle. Maybe they were not convinced." Fireman said casually. "That's it?" Li Tianlan's eyes were suspicious. "It must be more than that." A voice with a strong smile sounded. Han Chongyang, the yin and yang swordmaster of Mount Shu, came out with a smile. "Elder Fire, is there any gossip you haven't told? When Jiang Heir saw you just now, it was as if he had seen the enemy who killed his father. How could he be like that when he called him uncle?" Fireman groaned. He felt a sense of helplessness that a good man didn't mention his past achievements. At the same time, Reki City International Airport. The flight from South America to Eastern Europe slowly landed. A middle-aged man about 50 years old stepped off the plane with a black man. The middle-aged man's appearance was not outstanding. He had a relatively ordinary face, slightly dark, but his eyes and temperament were extremely calm, even gentle. There was no fierce aura around him. His words and deeds were extremely gentle and casual. On the other hand, the black man standing behind him was like a sharp long sword, surging with a strong murderous aura. In the early morning of August 8th in Eastern Europe, in the absence of any warning circumstances, Jiang Qiansong, patriarch of the Jiang family of South America, cooperated with Black Ghost, the guardian deity of Africa. They arrived in Eastern Europe. Wulon State was a little cold. The airport of Reki City was even colder. Jiang Qiansong walked unhurriedly. He had just gotten off the plane. The news of Jiang Qianyan's death had not reached his ears, so he acted very casually. "Master, who should I kill?" Black Ghost asked in a somewhat stiff Chinese. The Jiang family of South America was rooted in South America, but they insisted on speaking Chinese within the clan. Even all the retainers of the Jiang family of South America needed to master Chinese. "Kill a lot of people." Jiang Qiansong narrowed his eyes and chuckled. "Those who are enemies of the Jiang family of South America deserve to be killed." His voice was calm and gentle. Black Ghost nodded and said stiffly, "They deserve to be killed." When everyone thought that Black Ghost was an ally of the Jiang family of South America from Africa, No one ever thought that the famous Black Ghost was just a slave of the Jianghu family of South America. It was impossible for an invincible realm expert to appear out of thin air in the dark world. Any invincible realm expert had cause and effect. If you couldn't see cause and effect, it could only prove that there were things in the world that you couldn't control. The Jianghu family of South America set up a secret death training camp in a mountain range in Africa decades ago in the name of a school. For decades, out of tens of thousands of Africans, no more than 10 could come out of the death training camp alive. The number was small. However, every single person who came out of the death training camp was a true expert. But among so many people, there was only one invincible realm expert, Black Ghost, who was poured with countless blood. Jiang Qiansong didn't feel sorry. It was good to have one invincible realm expert among tens of thousands of African pariahs. From the day Black Ghost broke through to the invincible realm, Jiang Qiansong was sure that he would become his most powerful assistant and even partner. So in the decisive Battle of Heaven Capital 3 years ago, after Xianxia was killed and the murderous weapon, the legend of Qin, was lost, Jiang Qiansong sent Africa to summon Black Ghost. Black Ghost's strength was not strong. In terms of comprehensive strength, Black Ghost could probably hover in the top 10 of the holy list. But in terms of attack power, his attack was fierce and could even directly rank at the bottom of the divine list. His biggest weakness was defense. Jiang Qiansong, on the other hand, was best at defense. Jiang Qiansong now ranked 10th on the divine list, and he had a codename that was not pleasant to hear. Black Tortoise. Turtles were good at defense. As the patriarch of the Jianghu family of South America, although his strength was not high on the divine list, he was recognized as the best in the world in defense in the dark world. He and Black Ghost. One for offense and one for defense. Plus Jiang Qianyan. The Jianghu family of South America sent 3 invincible realm experts to Eastern Europe this time, and they were invincible realm experts whose shortcomings could make up for each other. Jiang Qiansong walked out of the airport and looked up at the rising sun in Reki City. The light of the morning sun fell on him, so bright and beautiful. Jiang Qiansong suddenly felt that he was standing very high, so high that he could see the whole world. 3 invincible realm experts, countless elites, the foundation behind Eastern Europe, and trustworthy allies. Jiang Qiansong laughed. At this moment, he had no idea why he would fail in this mess. Not at all. He stood quietly at the airport and felt that he was so powerful. It was the feeling of being in control of everything. He stood here and ruled the world. In the shabby apartment in Reki City. Fireman finally couldn't bear the casual questions, but Han Chongyang became more and more serious. Cool breeze and drifting cloud had gradually recovered. Yun Qinshi also walked out of the room. When the Yin and Yang sword master of Mount Shu asked Fireman about his past with the Jiang brothers for the umpteenth time, Fireman finally told the truth of that year. His appearance was ordinary and dull, and when he told the truth, he seemed extremely sincere. At the airport, Jiang Qiansong stood alone and ruled the world. Inside the apartment, Fireman scratched his sparse hair and said helplessly, "It's really nothing. It's just that the 2 brothers said that my urine was delicious." Genius 1 second to remember this site address. Mobile version. You're tuning in to the Wisdom Diary YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.